The Guardian's base smells like recycled air and old concrete. 40 feet of reinforced earth separate this room from the surface, and it was built that way deliberately, not to keep threats out, but to keep what happened inside from reaching anyone above. The overhead lighting is the flat, colorless kind that makes everything look like a photograph of itself. 7 superhumans stand in various configurations around a room that was designed for briefings and has never hosted anything this consequential. Red Rush is mid-sentence about something that happened in Cincinnati. Nobody will remember what. Martian Man stands against the far wall with his arms folded, watching the room with the patient, measuring stillness of a species that communicates in more dimensions than this one. War Woman has her mace at her hip, not drawn, but her right hand is resting near it the way experienced fighters rest near things. Green Ghost is by the door, half present the way she always is, like she's decided the optimal escape route before anyone else has registered that escape might be necessary. Aquarus sits, which he rarely does, heavy and deliberate. Darkwing stands in the corner he has already selected as tactically superior to every other corner, and catalogues the room out of professional habit. Entry points, ceiling height, weight-bearing columns, the subtle bulge behind the wall panel that means surveillance equipment. The Immortal stands at the center, arms crossed. He has been in rooms like this since before the concrete was invented, and his stillness is not patience. It is the accumulated weight of a man who has outlived every trend and every emergency and learned that urgency is almost always someone else's miscalculation. They came because Omni-Man called them. That is all the reason anyone needed. Omni-Man enters. The room's energy doesn't shatter, it shifts, the way a barometric pressure shifts before weather, subtle and total. He moves through the door, and his cape settles around him with the quiet authority of something that belongs exactly where it is. He crosses to the center of the room. He looks at the Immortal. Something in his face has already changed, though none of them can name what, because none of them have seen it before. His hand begins to rise. His hand stops. From the outside, it looks like a man who has forgotten something. A pause. A breath held. The hand stays where it is, half raised, fingers not yet committed, and then Nolan Grayson stands very still in the middle of the Guardian's base, while 2,000 years of a different life pour into the vessel of the present. It is not like remembering. Memory is passive. This is weight. This is the accumulated consequence of every specific choice arriving simultaneously. Debbie's face across a kitchen table when the truth came out. The sound a city makes when it stops fighting back. His son's fists, which hit harder than anything he had ever felt in 20 centuries of warfare, not because of the physical force, but because of who was throwing them and why. The look on Mark's face during those moments. Not rage, which Nolan could have handled. Something worse. Grief doing the work that anger had given up on. He stood next to me at the end. Dad. He was the only one there. Nolan's hand drops. He goes to his knees. The sound of it, one knee on reinforced concrete, a controlled descent rather than a collapse, is very quiet. But in a room that has gone completely silent, it is the loudest thing anyone has ever heard in this base. Red Rush stops talking about Cincinnati. Nobody moves for 3 full seconds. The Immortal moves first, because the Immortal always does, not toward Nolan, but into a weight distribution shift that anyone who has fought for as long as he has would recognize as the body-preparing options without committing to any of them. War Woman's mace is in her hand now. Red Rush has displaced himself 6 feet to the left, which took him less than 1/10 of a second and left a slight scorch mark on the floor from the friction. Darkwing has not moved from his corner and is watching with the focused intensity of a man who is learning things. Nolan looks at the floor for a moment. Then he looks up. His voice, when it comes, carries the effort of a man compressing an enormous thing into a container it almost doesn't fit. I was sent here to conquer this planet. The room does not react the way rooms react in films. There is no sudden movement, no shouted denial. There is instead a quality of stillness that is different from the stillness before. Denser, load-bearing. I was going to kill all of you tonight. He says it with the flatness of a man stating a structural fact about a building he is standing in. Something happened to me. Something I am not going to be able to fully explain in the next 60 seconds, which is how long we have before I need you to make a decision. He looks at the Immortal, specifically at the Immortal, because some instinct in him knows that the Immortal is the load-bearing column in this particular room. What I need you to do right now is not attack me, because the most important person I have ever known is about to walk through that door. and I need him to walk through it, and I need you to let him. You're asking us to... War Woman starts. The doors at the far end of the base come off their hinges, not from an explosion. From the precise application of a single fist to the exact point where the reinforced frame transfers load to the wall, the kind of knowledge that requires either an engineering degree or a very specific education in how structures fail. The doors don't fly, they drop, controlled, landing flat because whatever removed them didn't want shrapnel. Mark steps through. He is 17 years old. Brown hair pushed back from the flight here. Jeans, a gray hoodie with a small logo on the chest that has nothing to do with anything. He is visibly lean and athletic in the way that someone who has recently discovered they can lift a car is lean and athletic, the body catching up to the new reality of itself. His expression is the problem. 17-year-olds do not have that expression. It belongs to a specific category of person: surgeons, certain generals, anyone who has stood at the exact center of an irreversible decision enough times that the face stops performing the weight and simply carries it. He scans the room in a single pass: entry points, structural integrity, the emotional state of each individual, threat posture, surveillance cameras, Nolan's position, and physical condition. It takes him approximately 2 seconds. Then he looks at his father. Across the length of the room, across 7 superhumans who are collectively capable of leveling a city block, Mark and Nolan look at each other. What the Guardians see: a father and son making eye contact. What is actually happening? 2 soldiers reading each other's posture across a cleared battlefield, confirming a hypothesis, and making 1,000 sequential decisions in the space of 4 seconds. Mark clocks his father's shoulders, set in the specific controlled release of a man who has chosen to stand down, not the defensive posture of mid-breakdown. The micro-expression around Nolan's eyes carries a guilt he recognizes because he watched it develop over decades, then watched it resolve into something harder earned, and now here it is at the beginning, already present, which means the awakening worked exactly as it worked for him. Nolan clocks his son, the way a 17-year-old boy moves through a room full of armed metahumans without checking a single one of them for threat level. The economy of it. The way his eyes prioritize the room's structure over its inhabitants, which is what you do when you're confident you can handle the inhabitants and want to know what the room itself can do to you. So it worked for you too, Mark says. How much do you remember? Nolan asks. Everything. A pause that lasts exactly as long as it needs to. You were going to kill them. Nolan doesn't look away. Yes, you didn't. No. Mark turns to look at the 7 Guardians, who are collectively pointing their combat capabilities in various configurations at both of them now. He looks at the ceiling. He counted 4 camera housings on the way in, which means Cecil Stedman has been watching this since before the doors came off. He looks at the 17 sealed exits. He makes a decision. He pulls a chair from against the wall. He sits in it backward, arms resting across the top of the backrest, completely relaxed in the way that only reads as relaxed if you don't notice that his back is to nothing and every person in the room is in his peripheral vision. He looks at the immortal. Sit down, he says. We have about 40 minutes before someone above Cecil's pay grade decides this situation requires a kinetic response. I'd like to be done with this conversation before that happens. Nobody sits, but nobody attacks, which is a different thing and the thing that matters. He knew Cecil's name, Darkwing says to War Woman in a voice calibrated for exactly the distance between them. He's a child, War Woman says. He removed blast-reinforced doors with a single controlled strike, and he hasn't looked nervous for 1 second since he walked in. Darkwing doesn't take his eyes off Mark. Stop using that word. Red Rush moves. Not aggressively. Laterally, a drift that positions him behind Mark's left shoulder, which is the kind of move that speedsters make when they want to establish a response angle without triggering the thing they're responding to. Mark speaks without turning. Don't. You're faster than me in this body. I know that. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But the moment you commit to that angle, this conversation ends and the situation gets worse for everyone in this room. A beat. I need 40 minutes. After that, make whatever choice you want. Red Rush stops. The room is very still again. Mark lets it be still. He doesn't fill it. Then, I'm going to ask you one question. You don't have to answer out loud. Just hold it. In everything you've seen and fought and survived, has anything come close to what you were just told? That the most powerful man on Earth was sent here to conquer it and was 45 seconds from killing every one of you? The silence is the answer. Good, Mark says, because what I'm about to tell you is considerably worse than that. GDA observation room, simultaneous Cecil Stedman watches on 6 feeds. He has a phone in his right hand, direct line to 3 separate contingency protocols. 2 kinetic, one that involves a very specific piece of technology buried under the building where he's currently sitting. He has not dialed any of them. He has been holding the phone for 4 minutes and 11 seconds without dialing. The feeds run through a GDA surveillance tap that Cecil had installed in the Guardians' base 18 months ago, during a routine security audit that the Guardians believed was about external threat monitoring. It was. It was also about this, the contingency that most people in his position would have called paranoid, and that Cecil had simply called Tuesday. "Sir, should we—" His assistant starts from behind him. "No," Cecil says. A pause. On the center feed, a 17-year-old boy sits backward in a folding chair and manages a room full of superhumans with the administrative calm of a man reviewing quarterly projections. "Get me a clean room," Cecil says. "No recording equipment, no observation, Faraday compliant." He watches the screen for another moment. "Tell them both I'll meet them in 20 minutes. He sets the phone down. He picks up his coffee. He holds it without drinking it. He looks at the screen. "What the hell are you?" Cecil says quietly. To the boy on the monitor who cannot hear him, and who, Cecil is beginning to suspect, already knows exactly what Cecil is thinking. He drinks the coffee. It has gone cold. The room Cecil chose has no name on any GDA filing system. It exists on sub-level documentation as a utility corridor. Maintenance access, nothing of interest. Skip to the next page. The reality is 4-foot reinforced walls, a Faraday cage embedded in the concrete, 0 camera housing, 0 microphone infrastructure, and a table bolted to the floor with 4 chairs around it, because Cecil Stedman has, over the course of a very long career, learned that the rooms where the most important conversations happened should never have more furniture than necessary. Mark and Nolan arrive first. The walk here took 11 minutes through 3 secured corridors and 2 elevator transitions. They did not speak during it. They didn't need to. The nonverbal shorthand between them has the compression ratio of 2 people who have known each other at the most extreme possible depth. And the 11 minutes were spent in the effortless synchronization of soldiers who have walked toward worse things together and survived. By the time they sit, they have already established Nolan speaks to fill specific gaps. Mark runs the room. Nothing is concealed from Cecil, not because they trust him yet, but because the only play that works requires him to trust them, and that requires complete transparency delivered with complete control. They sit on the same side of the table, hands visible, relaxed. Cecil enters 2 minutes later with the immortal at his shoulder. Cecil chose him specifically. A man who cannot be killed is a reasonable insurance policy when you're about to sit across from 2 Viltrumites in a room with no cameras. The immortal looks at Mark and Nolan's seating arrangement and says nothing. He takes the chair at the end of the table, equidistant, which is its own statement. Cecil sits across from them. He has nothing in his hands. No files, no tablet, no coffee. He studies them both with the measured attention of a man who has spent 30 years evaluating people who were trying to deceive him and has developed a precise internal taxonomy of what deception looks like. Neither of them looks like deception. That is, itself the most alarming thing. "Start at the beginning," he says. "The beginning is approximately 150 years of Viltrumite imperial history, and we don't have time for it," Mark says. "I'll give you what matters. What follows is not chaos. It has the structure of a professional briefing. Information delivered in sequence, contextualized precisely, with no editorializing and no performance." Mark speaks. Nolan supplements when Viltrumite cultural specificity is required. The immortal asks 3 questions over the course of 40 minutes. Mark answers each one before it finishes forming, which stops the immortal completely each time, not from confusion, but from the specific cognitive experience of having your thought completed by someone who shouldn't know what you were about to say. Cecil does not ask questions. He listens, and his face does what Cecil's face always does under pressure. Nothing at all, which is the most disciplined kind of reaction, and also the one that costs the most. The first beat, Mark lays out the Empire's actual condition, with the directness of a structural assessment. They are not a superpower with infinite reach and limitless soldiers. They are approximately 50 full-blooded warriors operating behind centuries of accumulated reputation, a bluff so old it has calcified into assumed fact. The Scourge virus took everything they didn't show the galaxy, and what the galaxy sees is the surface, and the surface is performance. The moment that reputation is credibly threatened by someone who can survive the response, Mark says the math changes completely. They can't replace losses. Every warrior they spend is a warrior they cannot get back. Cecil's left hand tightens slightly on the edge of the table. He is the only person in the room who notices he's done it. The second beat, Nolan provides context on the Argal bloodline, and Mark takes it from there. He explains it with the flatness of someone stating a property boundary. Argal was the last king of the Viltrumite Empire before the transition to Grand Regent governance. Nolan carries Argal's blood in direct descent. Mark carries it by extension. By the succession laws the Empire itself operates under, laws older than Thragg's tenure, laws Thragg has never repealed because repealing them would require acknowledging they exist. Mark represents the legitimate hereditary line to the Viltrumite throne. He explains what this means for Thragg's authority. He explains that this information delivered correctly to the right audience at the right moment will fracture the Empire's command structure without requiring a single physical confrontation. Thragg's power rests on two pillars, his strength, which is real, and his legitimacy, which is fabricated. Remove the second pillar, and the first becomes the problem of a very powerful man standing alone in space. The immortal stands up, not aggressively. He stands the way people stand when their body needs to do something while their mind processes a thing it wasn't built for. He puts both hands on the table and looks at Mark. Mark looks back at him. A moment passes. The immortal sits back down. The third beat, Mark walks through the threat timeline. Every significant hostile event that the original timeline produced, sequenced by proximity and severity, categorized by whether it requires preemptive action, reactive containment, or strategic conversion. He does this from memory. No notes, no hesitation. Occasional chronological corrections from Nolan. Twice he misorders events by weeks, and Nolan quietly corrects him both times, and the corrections are accepted without friction. Cecil interrupts once. His voice is exactly as level as it has been for the entire briefing. Everything you're telling me, you can prove any of it? Mark reaches into the front pocket of his hoodie. He sets a folded piece of paper on the table between them. He does not unfold it. He leaves that to Cecil. Cecil unfolds it. He reads it. He reads it again. It is a technical schematic of the GDA's classified reaniman project, not the sanitized version that exists in the accessible files, but the actual working documentation, including a specific flaw in the neural bonding sequence at the base of the procedure, a flaw that Cecil's own science team flagged as a theoretical possibility 8 months ago, and then marked as low probability and moved on. The flaw is not low probability. Cecil has suspected this for 6 weeks and has not yet decided how to address it without exposing that he's been running the program outside its authorized parameters. He looks up. That flaw, Mark says, causes a containment failure in about 18 months. One of your reanimen goes uncontrolled during a civilian operation, and the collateral damage is significant enough that the program gets exposed. We're going to fix it before it becomes a problem. But the point is that I know things that cannot be explained by any intelligence operation or lucky inference. I'm not an enemy. I'm the most valuable asset this planet has ever had access to, and I'm offering you full cooperation. He holds Cecil's gaze. Let me prove that over the next 6 weeks. After 6 weeks, you'll have enough verification to make whatever decision you're going to make. Cecil sets the schematic down flat on the table. He smooths one edge of it with his thumb. A small, precise movement. He looks at it for a moment longer than he needs to. Then he looks at Mark. What do you want from me? He asks. Resources, your network, access. In exchange, you get the single most effective planetary defense infrastructure this Earth has ever operated, running approximately 10 years ahead of when it would have existed without us. And operational command. Of the GDA, yes, that stays with you entirely. You run your organization, I'll tell you which rooms are going to be on fire before you smell the smoke. On anything that touches the Viltrumite Empire or any extraterrestrial threat vector, those calls are mine. Cecil is quiet for a moment. You're 17 years old. I'm a 500-year-old emperor in a 17-year-old body, and we both know what I am. Mark doesn't say it with heat. He says it the way you state a load capacity. The question is whether you spend the next 3 months verifying that, or whether we start saving lives tonight. Cecil looks at the immortal. The immortal looks at Cecil. Something passes between two very old, very experienced men who have spent their careers making decisions that most people never have to make and living with the specific kind of damage that produces. The conversation is entirely nonverbal. It takes approximately 4 seconds. Cecil looks back at Mark. Bi-weekly briefings. Full disclosure on any action that touches Earth's civilian population. Agreed. And if I determine you've become a threat to this planet, then you do whatever you decide to do, and I won't hold it against you, because it means something went wrong and we both failed. Mark stands, extends his hand across the table. Deal? Cecil shakes it. The handshake is brief and firm, and means more than most signed documents. Nolan, who has been still and quiet through the entire negotiation, watching his son run the room with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done exactly this in front of much larger audiences, allows something through his expression for exactly 1 moment. It is not pride performed for an audience. It is the private version, the one that costs something to show. He closes it off before anyone but Mark can read it. Mark doesn't look at him. He doesn't need to. The corridor outside the clean room is 12 feet wide and lit with the same colorless overhead panels as everything else down here. The Immortal pulls Nolan aside before they reach the elevator. Not by force, he simply stops walking, and Nolan stops with him, because Nolan recognizes the specific quality of a man who has something to say and has decided it will be said now. The Immortal looks at him. The directness of it is not aggressive. It is the directness of a man who has lived long enough to have discarded every form of conversational cushioning as a waste of time that he has already spent too much of. You were going to kill us, he says. Yes. And the only reason you didn't is because of whatever happened to you in that room. Yes. The Immortal is quiet for a moment. He takes the measure of Nolan the way he has taken the measure of every person he has encountered across however many centuries, not with suspicion, but with the accumulated pattern recognition of someone who has seen every kind of person there is, and knows which category they're actually in, regardless of which category they claim. If you raise a hand against anyone I'm responsible for, he says, for any reason, under any authority, I will dedicate whatever time I have left, and I have a great deal of it, to making certain that everyone who matters knows exactly what you are. Nolan doesn't look away. That's fair. I'll be watching your boy. So will I. The weight of it is in Nolan's voice, not as performance, but as the specific gravity of a man who spent 2,000 years choosing the wrong thing and has been given the precise shape of what choosing correctly looks like. That's all I've ever wanted to do. The Grayson house is quiet in the way houses are quiet at 11:30, on a weekday when the person inside has been awake since 8, waiting for someone to come home. Debbie is in the kitchen. The light above the sink is on. She has made tea and not touched it. Mark comes through the back door. He looks exactly like her son. Same face, same hair pushed back, same worn-out hoodie, and something about the way he moves through the door is just different enough that she notices it without being able to name it. A mother's calibration, which is its own kind of intelligence. She starts to ask. He crosses the kitchen and puts his arms around her. It is not a teenage hug. It is the hug of a man who has grieved someone and been given them back, and knows, with the certainty of someone who has lost things and found them, exactly how much this specific moment costs and what it's worth. He holds on. Mark, Debbie says quietly into his shoulder. What's wrong? Nothing is wrong. He doesn't let go yet. Everything is going to be okay, Mom. All of it. I need you to know that before anything else. She doesn't understand. He doesn't explain. But she feels the weight in him, something enormous, load-bearing, and underneath it, like bedrock, something that has recently been set down rather than added. She holds on a little longer. The GDA Command Center runs 24 hours because threats don't observe business hours, and Cecil Stedman runs it like a man who has personally verified that fact on every continent. The holographic operations table in the center of the room is a $3 million piece of hardware that Cecil requisitioned 4 years ago by burying the cost inside a FEMA infrastructure grant. It projects in full 3 dimensions, updates in real time from 17 satellite feeds, and has been used primarily to track metahuman incident responses and the occasional extraterrestrial contact. Mark has been using it for 6 hours. He has restructured the interface, rerouted 4 data feeds, and added a threat categorization overlay that the GDA's own technical team spent 40 minutes studying before one of them quietly admitted they couldn't have built it. Cecil stands to Mark's left. Nolan stands to his right. The Guardians? Those who agreed to be present, which is all of them, because the immortal made it clear that presence was the professional option, occupy the outer ring of the room. Darkwing is already taking notes. Robot, who Cecil brought in at Mark's specific request and who has been still as furniture since he arrived, watches the display with the focused attention of a mind that processes information the way other people breathe. Mark pulls up the first file. The Mauler twins. Their current laboratory is in a converted warehouse complex in Cleveland, sub-basement level, accessed through a freight elevator with a false floor. They're mid-cycle on a cloning project that's going to produce a problem in about 8 months, if it isn't interrupted. He looks at the display rather than the room. We're not destroying the lab. We're taking everything in it and offering them a conversion. Conversion, Warwoman says. They're 2 of the most capable biological engineers on this planet, operating without oversight or resources. That's a waste. He moves on before the room can debate it. Darkwing. Red Rush. You're handling Cleveland. I need precision and speed, not power. The approach needs to be clean enough that they don't have time to trigger the project's fail-safe deletion sequence. How do you know there's a deletion sequence? Red Rush asks. Because they built one. They always build one. He pulls up the next file. Doc Seismic. Tectonic frequency generator buried under Mount Rushmore. He's been running low-amplitude tests for 3 months that your seismic monitoring flagged as geological activity. They're not geological activity. He looks at Cecil. I need a demolition team and a geology survey crew for the post-operation assessment. We collapsed the tunnel network from above. He's not in the facility currently. He's in Albuquerque, and he'll stay there for another 9 days. Cecil makes a note. His expression communicates nothing. The flaxen portal on the outskirts of Columbus, it's been building charge for 16 weeks and it's going to hit critical threshold in 11 days. We close it from this side, permanently. Nolan and I are handling that one directly. He closes the file. 7 items total. 7 days. We clear the board. We hand Cecil a planet that isn't hemorrhaging active threat vectors, and then we move on to the work that actually matters. He looks around the room for the first time since he started. Questions. Just one. Darkwing says. How long have you been carrying all of this? A while, Mark says. Let's get to work. The warehouse district in Cleveland at 3 in the morning is the specific kind of quiet that exists in industrial zones. Not peaceful, just empty. Loading docks, security lighting on 6-hour timers, the particular smell of a river that has been working too hard for too long. Red Rush secures every exit in 0.4 seconds. This produces a sound like a single compressed exhale moving through the building's perimeter, and then stillness. By the time the stillness registers, it is already complete. Darkwing cuts the power grid at the external junction box with a device the size of a cigarette lighter. The sub-basement goes dark. His EMP countermeasures follow, a targeted pulse that kills every electronic trigger in the facility below and does nothing to the structural systems above, because Darkwing does not do imprecise work. The Mauler twins wake up in a contained space with no working equipment and no exits. One of them, the one who considers himself the original, though neither can prove it, makes it 3 steps toward the backup generator before he understands that the backup generator is also not working. He stops. His brother stops beside him. They stand in the dark and process the situation, with the particular speed of 2 minds that have been solving problems together for so long that the individual cognitive steps have blurred into something faster than either of them is separately. This is a professional operation, one says. Obviously, says the other. The ceiling above them opens. Not explosively. One section of it simply lifts away with the careful control of something that could have removed the entire roof and chose not to. Mark drops through the gap and lands in the space between them and the far wall. He does not land loudly. He looks at their research stations, the cloning arrays, the genetic sequencers, the project documentation spread across 3 workbenches, with the focused attention of someone who is confirming a memory rather than discovering a fact. Then he looks at them. Who do you work for? One of the Maulers asks. Myself, primarily. Mark holds up a tablet. On its screen, a GDA authorization code for a black site research facility in a location the display doesn't specify, attached to a budget figure that makes both of them go briefly still. I'm going to offer you a choice. You spend the next 10 years in a containment cell arguing about which of you is the original, or you spend the next 10 years in a fully equipped lab doing work that actually interests you, with a resource budget your current setup cannot approach, and the only condition is that your output runs through us. And if we refuse? The second Mauler asks. Then you go in the cell. Mark sets the tablet on the nearest workbench. But before you answer, you should know that the project in drawer 7, the one with the red label, has a recursive error in the base sequence that you haven't caught yet. In about 8 months, that error compounds past the point of correction and the project kills you both. Not the experiment. You, the actual people standing here. Silence. The first Mauler looks at drawer 7. He looks at his brother. His brother is already looking at him. What 3 things? The first one says. Mark pulls up a second screen. The neural bonding flaw in a project I can't describe yet. A containment material synthesis problem that your cloning work has already solved without you realizing it. And when I need it, technical consultation on a delivery system. 1 conversation, probably under an hour. That's it? The second Mauler asks. That's it. Another look between them. The specific calculation of 2 people who have spent their entire careers being hunted and contained, deciding whether this particular cage has better dimensions than the one they're currently in. We want the full budget figure confirmed in writing. Obviously, Mark says. The suburb here is flat enough that you can see the distortion from a quarter mile out. A shimmer above a vacant stretch at the edge of an evacuated development. A visual stutter at a fixed point where a row of unfinished houses gives way to open scrubland, and reality has been under sustained mechanical pressure for 16 weeks. The evacuation notice went out 2 months ago as a gas main concern, which is the kind of explanation that people accept because the alternative is worse, and nobody who filed the paperwork wanted to write down what they actually saw. Up close, the portal is approximately 6 meters wide and smells like ozone and something else, something that has no terrestrial reference point. Through the membrane, visible in fragmented flashes between the energy fluctuations, flaxen staging formations. Organized, disciplined, a military operation in mid-preparation that has been building toward a specific moment that is now 11 days away. Mark and Nolan stand 30 feet back and look at it. In the original timeline, I fought 3 incursions before their aging accelerated enough to end it naturally, Nolan says. 3 incursions and significant infrastructure damage each time. Mark looks at the portal's pulse rhythm, irregular on the surface, but with an underlying pattern that he has been watching for 90 seconds, and has already mapped. Their aging in Earth's timeline is a defense mechanism we didn't build and can't replicate, so we use something we did build. He holds up the device. It is the product of 6 hours in the GDA's technical lab with Robot, who built it from specifications Mark dictated from memory, and said nothing about where the specifications came from. It is not impressive to look at. A matte gray rectangle, slightly larger than a television remote, with a single recessed activation point. That closes it permanently? Nolan asks. It introduces a phase inversion frequency into the membrane's base oscillation. The portal loses structural coherence from this side and can't be re-established at this coordinate without rebuilding the anchor infrastructure from scratch, on their end. That takes them approximately 40 years by their temporal experience, which is about 6 months from ours. He looks at the flaxen formations through the membrane. They'll feel nothing. The door just closes. He activates it. The portal collapses inward. Not with violence, with the sound of something under tension being released. A deep concussive exhale, and then the shimmer is gone and the scrubland is just scrubland again. The spot where it was looks like every other spot for a quarter mile in every direction. The unfinished houses stand in their rows, undisturbed, waiting for an explanation that will never quite match what happened here. 14 seconds from activation to termination. Nolan stares at where the portal was. 3 battles, he says again. Quieter. We don't have property damage to spare. Mark pockets the device. Every city block that gets torn up is a week of reconstruction we can't run while we're watching the sky. He looks at the empty sky, and we're going to need to watch the sky very soon. The room is the same room it has always been. The specific disaster of a teenager who has more interests than organizational instinct, posters and textbooks and a desk that has never been used for studying. It is profoundly ordinary, and Mark sits in it like a man visiting a museum exhibit of himself. He is looking at a sketch on a piece of notebook paper, a costume, rough lines, proportions that suggest someone who knows exactly what the finished version should look like, but is translating it from memory rather than designing from scratch. It is recognizable as something he has worn, somewhere, in a life that technically hasn't happened yet. He hasn't put a costume on. He's been operating in civilian clothes because there hasn't been a moment where a costume would have helped, and several moments where visibility would have cost something. But the sketch is here because some part of him needed to put it down. Debbie knocks. 2 quiet taps. She has always knocked twice, and he has always known it was her. She comes in and sits on the edge of the bed beside him. She looks at the sketch without asking about it. "You're not sleeping," she says. "I don't need much sleep right now." That's new. She looks at him the way she has looked at him his entire life, the specific attention of someone who knows the difference between what her son says and what her son means. "Are you going to tell me what's actually happening?" He folds the sketch once, sets it on his knee. "I will, Mom. I promise you that. I just need a little more time to make sure everything is in the right place first." He looks at her. "I need you to trust me." "I trust you." She doesn't look away. "I don't trust what you and your father aren't telling me." A beat of silence in which Mark absorbs this and finds it completely accurate, and has no argument against it. "That's fair," he says. She looks at him for a moment longer. Then she puts her hand over his, once, briefly, and stands and leaves and closes the door behind her, with the same 2-tap quiet she knocked with. Mark sits in the dark. He unfolds the sketch. Cecil reads the after-action reports in the order they were filed. He reads them the way he reads everything, completely, once, with total retention and no visible reaction. 7 items, 7 days. 0 civilian casualties. 17 active threat vectors either neutralized, physically contained, or operationally converted into GDA assets. The Mauler twins are already in transit to the Black Site facility, and their first technical consultation on the neural bonding problem produced a correction that Cecil's science team is calling the most significant advance in reanimant safety protocols in 4 years. "Sir, the 12-month cost projection on the Mauler contract, the asset value alone," his assistant starts. "I've read it," Cecil says. He sets the last report face down on his desk. He looks at the operations table across the room, currently running the standard monitoring feeds, quiet in the way it is only quiet when there is nothing active to track. He looks at it for a long moment. "Pull every file we have on Viltrumite intelligence. Everything, historical incident reports, theoretical threat models, every signal we've flagged as potentially non-terrestrial over the past decade. Unredacted." He stands. "I want it on Mark's desk by morning." "Some of those files are above your own clearance level, sir," his assistant says carefully. "Then raise mine." Cecil picks up his coffee. It is, as always, already cold. And raise his. He drinks it anyway and does not complain about the temperature, because Cecil Stedman has never in his career complained about something that can be solved by simply continuing to work. The analyst on duty flags it as an unknown biological signature, traveling under its own propulsion at a velocity that civilian aerospace technology cannot approach. She escalates it through 2 supervisory layers before it reaches Cecil, who is awake, because Cecil is always awake, and Cecil looks at the signature profile for approximately 4 seconds before picking up his direct line to Mark. Mark is already in the air when Cecil finishes the first sentence. He intersects Nolan over the Midwest at 40,000 feet. They have established a loose patrol coordination over the past 2 weeks, overlapping coverage that the GDA monitors but does not direct. No words exchanged at the intersection point. Nolan reads Mark's heading and altitude adjustment and matches it, and they climb together through the upper atmosphere into the dark where the air thins to nothing and the curve of the Earth becomes visible below them as a fact rather than a concept. Alan arrives as he always does, fast, direct, cheerful in the specific way of someone who has been doing a dangerous job long enough that the danger has become background radiation. He is expecting a planet. He is expecting to challenge its champion, absorb whatever the champion can produce, file his evaluation, and move on to the next assignment. He is not expecting 2 figures to emerge from the atmosphere at orbital altitude and intercept him before he covers the final 200 miles. He stops. The transition from full-speed approach to complete stillness takes him less than a second, and the deceleration would have liquefied anything with a human skeletal structure. He is not human. He reads the 2 figures ahead of him, and his body language shifts in the specific way of someone who has spent a career pattern-matching threats. Weight forward, hands away from his sides, every augmented system coming online. 2 Viltrumites, working together, traveling in coordinated formation, which means not fighting each other, which means an alliance, which is a scenario that the Coalition's Viltrumite threat briefings do not contain, because it has never happened in recorded interspecies contact. Nolan raises both hands. It is an unmistakably human gesture. Open palms, nothing concealed, the universal non-aggression signal that reads the same across species because the underlying communication is physical rather than cultural. For a Viltrumite to do it is objectively absurd. Viltrumites do not do this. The gesture's absurdity is precisely why it works. It is too strange to be a tactical feint. Alan, Mark says. Alan's eyes move to the younger one, then back to the older one, then back to the younger one, who just addressed him by name on their first contact in a solar system Alan has visited multiple times and has never made personal contact with before today. "Do I know you?" he asks. "Not yet." Mark holds the orbital position without drift, which requires the continuous micro-adjustments of controlled flight and which he performs without apparent attention. "But you know what we are, which means you know exactly why you should listen very carefully to what I'm about to say." They move to a stable position at low Earth orbit, close enough that the planet fills a third of the visual field below them. The terminator line between day and night cutting a slow curve across the Pacific. The stars above are the unfiltered stars of outside the atmosphere, more of them and sharper than any ground-based observer ever sees. It is a remarkable location for what is, in its content, a military intelligence briefing. Mark does not build to it. Preamble wastes time, and Alan's time specifically is something Mark is not willing to waste. He knows what Alan becomes, what he contributes. How much of the war that is coming depends on the coalition having the correct information at the correct moment. Every minute of unnecessary conversation is a minute further from that. "I'm Mark Grayson. My father is Nolan Grayson. You know him as Omni-Man. We were both sent here as part of the Viltrumite Empire's Earth integration program." A beat. "We are no longer operating on behalf of that program. What we are operating on behalf of is a specific outcome that the coalition of planets wants as badly as we do, and has significantly less information to achieve." "You're defecting," Alan says. "We're acting. Defection implies we're running from something. We're running towards something, which is a different posture with different implications." Mark looks at him steadily. "The Empire is not what it presents itself as. You know this. The coalition has suspected it for decades. What you don't have is specifics. I have specifics." Alan is quiet for a moment. He is processing, not skeptically, but carefully, the way someone processes information that is either exactly what they need or exactly what a sophisticated deception would look like, and is trying to determine which category applies. "You're telling me," Alan says, "that a Viltrumite, that two Viltrumites, are the legitimate heirs to the Viltrumite throne, and that you're handing me the mechanism to dismantle the Empire from the inside." "I'm handing you the mechanism to change it," Mark says. "Dismantling it isn't the goal. The goal is a Viltrumite Empire without Thragg in it, operating under governance that isn't built on suppression and military expansion. The information on this drive makes that possible." "Why would you?" Alan starts. "Because I've already lived through the version where this takes 60 more years and costs more lives than I'm willing to count again." The patience in Mark's voice is not the patience of someone suppressing frustration. It is the patience of geological time, something that has simply been present for long enough that urgency has become a relative concept. I don't want to do that again. This is the faster path, for everyone. Alan looks at Nolan, who has been present and silent through this, not absent, but deliberate. There is a specific quality to Nolan's stillness that communicates active thought rather than deference. "And him?" Alan asks. "He agrees with this?" "I spent 2,000 years doing the Empire's work," Nolan says. "Then I spent the rest of my life trying to undo it." He looks at Alan without flinching. "I know what you think of Viltrumites. I know what we cost your species. I'm not going to ask you to set that aside. I'm asking you to decide whether what we're offering is worth working with us to achieve it." Alan absorbs this, the specific arithmetic of a man weighing a deep personal history against a tactical opportunity. Mark reaches into his jacket. The drive is small, coalition-compatible format, which required a specific technical adaptation that Robot completed in 4 hours 2 days ago without asking why the specifications needed to be coalition-compatible. Mark holds it between 2 fingers and does not extend it yet. "I'm going to describe what's on this before you take it," he says, "so you know what you're holding." He goes through it in sequence. The Scourge virus synthesis protocols, not the crude delivery system the Coalition currently possesses. but a refined version with a targeted dispersal mechanism that the Coalition's biochemical teams have been trying to develop for a decade and haven't cracked. Thragg's combat data, 5 centuries of personal observation, specific fighting tendencies, exploitable patterns, the precise physiological details of how his stamina expenditure compounds under sustained two-front pressure, the locations of every Viltrumite deep cover agent currently operating in Coalition member worlds, 43 names, coordinates, cover identities, contact schedules, the coordinates of every active Viltrumite outpost in the outer systems, and the Argol bloodline documentation, genetic verification codes, historical records, the names and current assigned positions of the 3 Imperial archivists who were present when Thragg discovered the truth and were subsequently relocated. Alan handles the drive with the care of a man who has just been handed something that could end a war. He is quiet for longer than he has been quiet at any point in the conversation. If this is accurate, he starts. It is. Then, some of these outpost coordinates alone would restructure our entire strategic picture. We've been operating on maybe 1/10 of this information for years. He looks up. How long have you been compiling this? 2 weeks, Mark says. Alan looks at him. The expression on his face is the specific expression of someone recalibrating a fundamental assumption. 2 weeks, Alan repeats. We've been busy. Nolan speaks now. He has been selecting this moment, letting Mark establish the framework, waiting for the point where the conversation shifts from information to obligation. Because obligation is a different kind of negotiation, and one that benefits from a different voice. He addresses Alan directly, not as a superior to a subordinate, and not as a supplicant, as one soldier to another, the register of 2 people who have both done the kind of work that doesn't get discussed in comfortable rooms. We're asking for one thing in return, Nolan says. When the time comes, and we will contact you when it does, with specific timing parameters, we need the Coalition fleet positioned for a coordinated strike on the Viltrumite home system, not to destroy it, to arrive at the precise moment when the political structure has already begun to collapse internally, to ensure that Thragg's remaining loyalists cannot regroup around a new command structure. He looks at him steadily. The timing is the entire mechanism. Arrive too early and you're fighting a unified empire. Arrive at the right moment and you're containing a fragmentation that's already in progress. And if I can't guarantee fleet positioning, Alan asks, Coalition command doesn't move on one operative's recommendation. Then we proceed without Coalition support, and it costs significantly more lives on every side, including yours. Nolan says it without heat. The choice is yours. We're not issuing an ultimatum. We're offering you a participation in an outcome that benefits the Coalition more than any other single operation in the history of your organization. What you do with that offer is your decision. Alan turns the drive over in his hand. He looks at it for a moment. Then he looks at the Earth below them, the blue-white curve of a planet that has no idea this conversation is happening 40 miles above it. I'll take it to Coalition High Command, Alan says. I can't speak for them. I know. That's all we're asking. Alan closes his hand around the drive. He looks at them both. This mismatched pair, this father and son who move through space with the ease of people who have been doing it long enough to forget it's extraordinary, who addressed him by name at first contact and have spent this entire conversation 3 steps ahead of his questions. He extends his fist, a Coalition gesture, something between a salute and an acknowledgement, used between people who are not allies yet but have just agreed to work toward a common point. Mark bumps it. The gesture is comfortable on him, which means he has done it before, which means things about the future that Alan is only beginning to process. Alan's expression shifts, not to warmth exactly, but to the specific look of someone who has just had their fundamental model of a situation revised and is updating in real time. For the record, Alan says, You are the 2 strangest Viltrumites I have ever encountered, and I have encountered a significant number of Viltrumites. Good, Mark says. Keep that impression. It'll matter later. Alan looks at him once more. Then he turns and accelerates away from Earth at a velocity that compresses the distance between here and the outer system into something that takes minutes rather than months. Mark and Nolan watch him go. Below them, the planet turns. The Terminator line has moved another few degrees across the Pacific, morning arriving somewhere, as it always is, as it will keep doing regardless of what happens in the dark above it. He'll bring it to the Coalition, Nolan says. Yes, and they'll agree. They'll take 3 weeks to debate it and then agree. Mark watches Alan's trajectory until it disappears against the starfield, which means we have 3 weeks to build the trap. He turns back toward the atmosphere. Nolan falls into formation beside him, and they descend together into the air, into the weight of gravity, back toward a planet that is, for the first time in its history, being defended by the people who were sent to conquer it. The planning session convenes at 0600 hours, because Mark scheduled it for 0600 hours, and the people in this room have learned, over the past 3 weeks, that Mark's scheduling is not a suggestion dressed up as a calendar invite. Cecil is present. Nolan stands against the far wall with his coffee. He has developed a coffee habit in the past 3 weeks that Debbie finds amusing and Mark finds useful as a behavioral tell. Nolan only drinks it when he's suppressing the impulse to speak before he's ready. The immortal sits at the table with his arms crossed, in the configuration that means he is listening rather than waiting to object. Darkwing has already reviewed the preliminary documents that Mark distributed at midnight and has 3 pages of handwritten notes that he will not refer to, because he has already memorized them. Robot occupies the corner where the room's wireless infrastructure is densest, for reasons that are his own. Mark pulls up the lunar topographical display. The moon fills the center of the holographic table in precise relief. Every crater, every ridgeline, every subsurface cavity that the GDA's geological survey data has documented over 40 years of observation. The Empire will send someone to verify Nolan's status, Mark begins. Not a diplomat, a combat evaluator, someone with the authority to assess whether a field agent has become compromised, and the capability to resolve the situation if he has. He looks at Nolan. Conquest, Nolan says. Conquest. He will not land on Earth immediately. He'll approach cautiously, run reconnaissance from a distance, and select his engagement point based on what he observes. Mark lets that sit for 1 second, which means we have a preparation window, and we are going to use that window to build the most comprehensively prepared killing ground that this solar system has ever contained. You want to turn the moon into a trap, Darkwing says. A kill box, Mark says. A trap implies we're hoping the target doesn't notice it in time. A kill box is a prepared environment that we understand completely, and the target does not, where every feature of the terrain is a tactical asset for us and a liability for him. There is no hoping involved. There is only preparation and execution. The room is quiet in the way rooms go quiet, when the thing being proposed is large enough that the mind needs a moment to find the edges of it. The logistics of modifying the lunar surface without triggering observation from any of the 17 nations that currently have orbital monitoring capability? Cecil starts carefully. Robot has a solution for the observation problem, Mark says. Robot. The GDA's existing deep space array can be reconfigured to generate a sensor shadow over the target modification zones. Robot says, any nation's orbital monitoring that queries the lunar surface in those sectors will receive archived baseline data rather than live feed. The reconfiguration takes 11 hours and leaves no detectable signature in the array's operational record. Cecil looks at Robot for a moment. How long have you been working on that? He asks. Since midnight, Robot says. When I received the preliminary documents. Cecil looks at Mark. Mark has already moved on to the display. Mark walks through the modifications with the precision of someone who has surveyed this terrain before, which, in the specific way that applies to him, he has. The first element, radiation saturation. He pulls up a frequency analysis overlay on the lunar topographical display. Viltrumite flight is achieved through vestibular organ function, a biogravitational system centered in the inner ear. At baseline, Viltrumite physiology handles standard radiation exposure without degradation. But there is a specific frequency range, narrow, non-obvious, requiring targeted emitter calibration that produces cumulative vestibular disruption in Viltrumite subjects under sustained exposure. The effect is not debilitating. It will not stop Conquest from fighting. What it will do, over the course of 15 to 20 minutes of combat in the saturation zone, is reduce his spatial orientation accuracy by approximately 8%. 8%, the Immortal says. In a fight between 2 baseline opponents, 8% is noise. In a fight between 2 prepared veterans who know the terrain exactly, and 1 opponent navigating blind at combat speed, Mark doesn't finish the sentence, because the math is self-evident. What are the emitters? Darkwing asks. Devices approximately the size of a field ration. Robot builds them. We distribute them across the target zone in patterns that create overlapping saturation fields, with no dead zones in the primary engagement corridors. Mark marks the distribution points on the display. 17 positions across a 2-kilometer operational radius. They run on a 6-hour power cycle. When Conquest arrives, they will be on their 3rd cycle, fully calibrated. I can have prototypes in 4 days, Robot says. Full production run and distribution capability by day 7, assuming Nolan handles physical placement. I'll handle it, Nolan says from the wall. Mark moves to the second element. Concealed positions. He marks 3 crater rims and a lava tube system that runs beneath the regolith in the target zone's southeastern quadrant. Approach corridors and intercept points. Every one of these positions, Nolan and I will have walked physically before Conquest arrives. We will know the footing, the line of sight, the acoustic signature of approach from each direction. He will be navigating a terrain he has never seen. That asymmetry is the second force multiplier. Third element, subsurface instability. He highlights 11 points across the target zone in amber. These are areas where the regolith is thin over large subsurface cavities, geological features that the survey data documents but that are not visible from above. Under normal circumstances, a Viltrumite's weight and impact force during combat would compromise the surface at these points. We know where they are. We steer the fight accordingly. Conquest steps where we need him to step. You're going to use the ground itself as a weapon, Cecil says. We're going to use everything, Mark says simply. That's what a kill box means. Darkwing has stopped taking notes. He is looking at the display with the expression of a man who has spent his entire career thinking tactically and has just encountered someone who thinks in a different dimension of it. Build it, Cecil says. Lunar surface. 1 week later, the moon is not silent the way people who have never been there imagine silence. It is the absence of medium, no air to carry vibration, no acoustic environment at all, just the bone conduction of your own heartbeat and the slight pressure of your suit and the vast indifferent fact of hard vacuum pressing against the boundary of your existence from every direction. Mark and Nolan walk the prepared terrain without suits because they don't need them. The cold registers as a physical fact rather than a threat. The vacuum is a condition rather than an emergency. They move across the regolith in the careful, deliberate pattern of a reconnaissance walk, measuring each position against their memorized survey data, calibrating the lived experience of the terrain against the tactical model they have been building for a week. The radiation emitters are invisible. Robot's placement is precise, each one buried to the depth that maximizes field coherence while leaving zero surface signature. Nolan placed all 17 in 6 hours, navigating by the coordinates Mark provided, and when they are walking the terrain now, Mark can feel the edge of the saturation field at the boundary markers, the way you feel a change in air pressure rather than a change in temperature. Subtle, cumulative. They have been at it for 2 hours when Nolan breaks the operational silence. In the other timeline, he says, not adding anything further, leaving the phrase there as an entry point, which is the conversational style of someone who has learned that the destination of a hard sentence is easier to reach if you don't announce it. Mark walks 3 more steps. Yes. Did you ever forgive me? Nolan says. Not a question quite. The inflection of it is too flat for a question. It is closer to a man saying a thing out loud that he has been carrying internally for long enough, that the internal version has become too heavy. Yes, Mark says. When, Nolan says. It wasn't a moment. It was a process. Something that happened over years, in pieces, in different circumstances. He looks at the Earth from the lunar surface, this view. From down there it is a comfort. The familiar sky, the horizon at a human scale. From up here, it is something else. A marble of blue and white and brown, impossibly fragile looking against the black, the entire scope of human experience compressed into a sphere you could cover with your thumb. He has stood here before and felt this before, and the feeling is not smaller for repetition. When you came back, when you chose to come back in the original timeline. That was the beginning of it. In this timeline, I came back before I ever left. I know. A beat. That's better. But it doesn't erase the shape of what you would have done. You know that. Nolan walks 2 steps before he answers. Yes, so do I. Mark turns to look at him, his father, standing on the moon in the specific light of a sun that reaches them unfiltered by atmosphere, looking exactly like what he is, a man carrying the full weight of what he was, and trying to hold it without being flattened by it. And I forgive you for it anyway. You're still my father. That's not conditional. The silence between them is not absence. It is the accumulated weight of a relationship that exists in two timelines simultaneously. The one where it broke and took years to repair, and this one where the repair arrived before the breaking. And both of them are still learning what that means. Nolan looks at the earth for a long moment. His expression is doing something complicated that he does not try to control, which is itself significant. Nolan Grayson spent 2,000 years controlling his expressions as a survival mechanism, and the places where he stops are the places that mean the most. Let's go over the eastern approach corridor again, he says finally. The footing on the crater rim at marker 9 is softer than the survey data indicated, Mark says. 18 inches east of the marked position. Noted. They walk east. The earth turns below them, unhurried, doing what it does regardless of the plans being made above it. The emitters run their silent cycles in the regolith at their feet, building charge, waiting for the specific footsteps they were built for. GDA Command Center. That evening. The Immortal finds Mark reviewing Conquest's historical combat records, GDA intelligence files supplemented with Nolan's personal testimony, which has added 17 annotations to documents that were previously theoretical. He sits across from Mark, without asking if it is a good time, because the Immortal has lived long enough to understand that there is never a good time for the things that matter. You've done this before, the Immortal says. Mark doesn't look up from the display. Done what? Built a kill box. On that specific terrain, against that specific opponent. Mark is quiet for a moment. Then, yes. How did it go the first time? We weren't as prepared. The fight was harder than it needed to be, and it cost more than it should have. He sets the display down. Looks at the Immortal directly. That's the entire reason we're doing it differently. The Immortal absorbs this with the patience of a man for whom time is not a limited resource in the way it is for everyone he has ever known. He looks at the lunar display, still active on the table, the topographic relief, the marked positions, the approach corridors color-coded by priority. You know how this fight ends, he says. Not an accusation, a statement made by someone who is trying to understand the precise shape of the thing he has agreed to be part of. I know how it ends if we've done our preparation correctly, Mark says. There's a difference. He looks at the Immortal. If I were certain of the outcome regardless of preparation, I wouldn't be spending 3 weeks preparing. The Immortal looks at him for a long moment. Then he nods once, the specific nod of a man who has asked what he needed to ask and received an answer he can work with. He stands and leaves without further conversation, which is the highest form of endorsement the Immortal offers. Mark watches him go. Then he turns back to Conquest's combat records and reads them again, because the version he knows from memory and the version in these files differ in 3 places, and the differences are the things he needs to understand before the week is out. Deep space, the outer edge of the Sol system. Conquest travels the way he has traveled for 4,000 years. Alone, direct, at a velocity that compresses interstellar distances into something manageable for a body that does not require food, water, or atmosphere and experiences time at the geological pace of a species that stopped counting years, somewhere around the 3rd millennium. He is not concerned. Concern implies uncertainty, and Conquest has not experienced genuine uncertainty since an engagement 600 years ago that took his arm and taught him that the prosthetic replacement was, in several measurable respects, an improvement. He has been in worse situations than an unresponsive field agent, and the resolution of those situations is part of the record that makes his name carry the specific weight it carries across 37 conquered worlds. Nolan's silence is puzzling rather than alarming. Nolan is committed, was committed, 23 years of consistent field reports, steady integration progress, reliable communication. The absence of communication over the past 6 weeks is anomalous. Anomalies have explanations. Conquest is here to identify the explanation and address it, which in practical terms means determining whether Nolan requires assistance, correction, or termination. He expects assistance. Nolan is too experienced for anything else. He enters the Sol system at the outer boundary and immediately begins passive observation, reading the electromagnetic signature of the 3rd planet, cataloging the orbital infrastructure, cross-referencing against Nolan's most recent field reports. The planet looks as it has always looked in the reports: primitive, densely populated, moderately defended by standards that would not inconvenience a single Viltrumite warrior for more than a few hours. Then his attention moves to the moon, The radiation signature is wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Not the kind of wrong that reads as a weapon or a trap. Nothing that triggers the combat evaluation protocols that 4,000 years have made automatic. It is subtly wrong. A frequency distribution in the regolith that does not match the geological baseline he has encountered on every previous pass through this system. New, recent, deliberate in its distribution pattern rather than natural in its randomness. He adjusts his approach trajectory, increases distance from the lunar surface by 60 kilometers, keeps the anomaly in his peripheral awareness while he continues the reconnaissance pass. He does not adjust far enough. Lunar surface, simultaneously. The GDA Deep Space Array has been tracking Conquest's biosignature for 36 hours. Mark identified the approach vector from the specific gravitational displacement pattern that a Viltrumite body produces at high velocity. A signature distinct enough to separate from background radiation if you know exactly what you're measuring for. Mark knows exactly what he's measuring for. He and Nolan are positioned at the primary observation point, a crater rim in the target zone's northern sector that provides a sightline across the full operational radius and sits at the intersection of 3 of the marked approach corridors. The emitters have been running for 19 hours. The saturation field is fully calibrated. The subsurface cavity at Marker 4, the one with the widest horizontal span, has been cleared of any surface debris that might provide visual warning of what lies beneath. Mark watches Conquest's approach on a GDA handheld display and notes the trajectory correction with the attention of someone confirming a prediction rather than monitoring an uncertainty. He saw the radiation signature, Nolan says. Yes, he adjusted 60 kilometers. Mark sets the display down. Not enough. He picks up the communication device, Viltrumite-compatible frequency, the same band that Conquest uses for standard Imperial operational communications. The band that Conquest monitors automatically because 4,000 years of fieldwork has made monitoring it as unconscious as breathing. Conquest, he says. The frequency sits empty for 2 seconds. Then, with the flat intonation of a man who has not yet decided how to categorize what he is hearing, "Who is this?" "Mark Grayson, also known as Invincible. You don't know me yet." Mark's Viltrumite is precise, the formal operational register, the one that carries Imperial authority in its cadence. "But you know my father. He's standing next to me. We've been expecting you." A longer silence. Conquest is processing, running the name, cross-referencing against Nolan's field reports, arriving at the half-breed son mentioned in the integration timeline as a secondary asset still years from full combat utility. "Nolan," the voice says. "Conquest," Nolan replies, and his voice carries the weight of 20 centuries of shared history with this man. 2 soldiers who have operated in the same empire for longer than most civilizations have existed. "What is this?" "An invitation," Mark says. "Come down to the surface. We have things to discuss." "I don't take invitations from children." "No. You take orders from Grand Regent Thragg. So does my father." A pause calibrated to let the next sentence arrive with its full weight. "Neither of us does any more. Come to the surface." "I'd rather have this conversation in person." The frequency goes quiet. 40 seconds pass. Then Conquest's biosignature shifts, adjusting from orbital reconnaissance altitude to a descent trajectory. He is coming down. Not because Mark invited him, because Conquest has decided that whatever this is, it ends on the ground, and 4,000 years of experience tells him that everything ends on the ground eventually. Lunar surface. Minutes later, Conquest descends with the measured aggression of a man who has already decided the outcome of a situation and is arriving to formalize it. His flight is controlled. He does not drop, he lands, the distinction being the difference between arrival and deployment. He touches the regolith of the target zone's central corridor at a velocity precisely calculated to communicate authority through impact without wasting energy on spectacle. He is larger than the GDA files suggested. The files documented his physical specifications accurately: height, estimated mass, the cybernetic prosthetic replacing his left arm, but documentation does not fully communicate the specific quality of a body that has been operating at the apex of physical capability for 4 millennia. He has the density of something geological. The way he stands on the lunar surface, the way his weight settles into it, communicates that he has stood on harder ground than this, and the ground accommodated him. His eyes move to Nolan first. Read him. Move to Mark. They stay on Mark for 3 seconds longer than they stayed on Nolan, which is itself a data point. Conquest is recalibrating his assessment of the secondary asset. the half-breed son, who is standing in a prepared kill box with the relaxed posture of a man who selected the furniture in his own home. He looks at the terrain, the crater rims, the deliberate spacing of the approach corridors, the subtle surface variations that indicate ground preparation rather than geological process. He takes the measure of all of it with the professional attention of a warrior who has walked prepared ground before and knows what it looks like. "You've been busy," he says. The tone is not impressed. It is the tone of a man noting an animal's construction of a nest, acknowledging the effort without revising his assessment of what the animal is. "Terrain management," Mark says. "We've been preparing for your visit. You knew I was coming. We knew you were coming the day we decided to change our plans." Mark looks at him with the directness that the immortal noted weeks ago and has not fully classified, not the directness of aggression and not the directness of challenge, but something that belongs to a different category entirely. The directness of someone who is simply present, completely, without the energy expenditure of performance. "Conquest, I'm going to give you one offer. I'll give it once, and I won't give it again. Stand down. Return to the Empire. Tell Thragg that Nolan has chosen to remain on Earth, and that the Conquest timetable requires significant reassessment. That's all. You leave here with your life, and the Empire gets a message that, while inconvenient, is manageable." Conquest tilts his head. It is a small movement, and it carries, in the specific body language of a man who has fought his way across 36 worlds, the precise weight of a predator who has just decided to enjoy himself. "The Conquest timetable requires reassessment," he repeats. The cadence of it carries something between amusement and contempt. Not performed, just the natural result of a 4,000-year-old apex warrior being told, by a teenager, the terms of his departure. "Where did they find you?" "Last chance," Mark says. Conquest's cybernetic arm moves for Nolan's throat. The movement is extraordinary. 4,000 years of refinement going into a single action, the arm coming up and across at a speed that would have claimed a position before the position's occupant registered the intent. The targeting is precise. Nolan's throat. Because Conquest has reviewed the integration reports, and the integration reports list Nolan as the primary threat by seniority, and Conquest's combat doctrine prioritizes the senior threat first and the secondary threat after. Nolan is not where Conquest's arm expects him to be. The displacement is small, 8 inches, a lateral shift executed in the same window as Conquest's initiation, and it happens because Nolan knew the arm was coming before it moved, because Mark knew Conquest's combat initiation sequence, and because they have spent a week on this terrain, and another week in the GDA files, and another week in the combined memory of 5 centuries doing nothing but preparing for the specific sequence of events that is now unfolding. The arm passes through the space where Nolan's throat was. Conquest is already adjusting. 4,000 years does not produce a fighter who commits fully to a single-point attack without contingency. And the adjustment is fast. Genuinely fast, the speed of someone who has earned his reputation across 36 worlds by being precisely as dangerous as advertised. Mark is already moving on the secondary line. He has been moving since before Conquest's arm lifted, because the decision to initiate was visible in Conquest's weight distribution 4 seconds before it translated into action. And Mark has been reading weight distribution in Viltrumites for 5 centuries. Conquest registers the secondary movement in his peripheral awareness, and begins the pivot that will address it, and understands, in the fraction of a second before contact, something that he has not understood about any opponent in living memory. They are not reacting to him, he is reacting to them. The pivot completes. Mark is not where the pivot anticipated. Nolan has repositioned. Conquest is standing in the center of a prepared kill box, surrounded by 2 opponents who know every centimeter of this ground, and have already decided where this fight goes next. And the 4,000-year-old calculation engine, that has never encountered this specific input, begins for the first time in centuries, the disorienting process of running without a reliable model. The radiation saturation field hums its inaudible frequency through the regolith. It has been running for 22 hours. The cumulative effect on Conquest's vestibular system is, at this moment, approximately 2%. It will not stay 2%. GDA Command Center. Simultaneous Cecil watches the lunar surface feed on the Deep Space Array's visual relay. Low resolution at this distance, heat signature overlay rather than optical, but sufficient to show 3 figures on the moon's surface, and the specific pattern of movement that the heat signatures are producing. "Sir, Should we alert the Guardians to stand by? His assistant asks. Cecil watches the display. The 3 heat signatures are moving. 2 of them are moving in a pattern he has seen in the past 3 weeks. Coordinated, deliberate, occupying different spatial positions relative to the 3rd with the kind of precision that requires either exceptional training or exceptional foreknowledge. The 3rd signature is moving faster, significantly faster. And it is, even at this resolution, even through heat signature overlay, clearly the largest of the 3. Cecil watches. No, he says. Sir, his assistant starts. No. He does not look away from the display. They don't need them. He watches the heat signatures move across the lunar surface in the specific pattern of a fight that is not going the way the largest participant expected it to go. He watches for 4 minutes without speaking. His coffee sits untouched and going cold beside him, which means he has forgotten it is there, which is the closest Cecil Stedman comes to being visibly affected by something. On the display, the 3rd heat signature stumbles. It is a small movement, a fraction of a second's spatial disorientation, barely visible at this resolution, the kind of thing that would mean nothing in any other context. Cecil picks up his coffee. He drinks it without looking away from the screen. Get me a clean channel to Mark's comm, he says. Stand by only. Don't open it unless I tell you. He watches the moon. The first thing Conquest does is hit Nolan hard enough to move a building. Not a tap, not a test. The full committed weight of 4,000 years deployed in a single strike because Conquest does not have gears between 0 and everything. His combat philosophy was built in an era when hesitation was an obituary, and 4 millennia have calcified that philosophy into something closer to physiology than choice. The strike goes for Nolan's sternum, traveling on a horizontal plane, and the speed of it is genuinely extraordinary, the kind of speed that compresses the window between intent and impact to something that baseline human perception cannot track. Nolan catches it on his forearm. The deflection costs him. The impact transfers through his arm into his shoulder with a force that would shatter reinforced concrete, and he takes it the way a man takes a wave he cannot avoid, not by resisting it, but by moving with its direction, using Conquest's committed momentum as the vector for his own repositioning. He pulls, rather than blocks, steps inside rather than away, and for the half-second that Conquest's arm is extended past the point of retraction, Nolan's elbow comes back along the same line, targeting the joint. It doesn't land clean. Conquest is already withdrawing, the adjustment instantaneous and precise, and the elbow catches the outer edge of the cybernetic prosthetic rather than the joint. The sound it produces is the sound of something engineered to withstand exactly this kind of force, withstanding it. Mark is on the secondary line. He has been on it since before the first strike, positioned at the angle that Conquest's initial targeting decision opened, the angle that targeting Nolan first always opens, because Conquest leads with the dominant threat, and the dominant threat's position creates a specific spatial gap on the left rear quadrant. Mark drives into that gap. His target is not Conquest's body. Not yet. His target is Conquest's base, the specific relationship between Conquest's feet and the regolith that a 4,000-year-old warrior has never had to think about because the ground has never been anything other than a neutral surface. The ground here is not neutral. It never was. Mark's strike hits Conquest's left knee from the rear lateral angle, not with enough force to buckle it, but with enough precision to displace the weight distribution by 3 degrees. On Earth, 3 degrees of displacement is an annoyance. On the lunar surface, in a saturation field that has now been running for 22 hours and has degraded Conquest's vestibular calibration by 4%, 3 degrees of displacement is the difference between a stable base and a base that requires active compensation. Conquest compensates. The compensation is fast, faster than Mark anticipated, which he notes without adjusting his assessment of the outcome, only his assessment of the pace. Then the cybernetic arm swings back and catches Mark across the left side of his chest, and the world goes sideways. The impact sends Mark through the crater wall at marker 2. Not into it, through it. The regolith face of the crater compresses and then gives, and Mark travels through 12 feet of compacted lunar rock and emerges from the other side in a spray of dust and fragmented stone that disperses in the vacuum in slow, silent arcs because there is no air to rush the particles down. He hits the open surface beyond the crater, bounces once, the specific, wrong physics bounce of a body moving too fast on a low-gravity surface, and orients before the second contact, 3 seconds from impact to standing. The left side of his chest is reporting damage that his body is already beginning to address, a deep structural complaint from ribs that have been significantly stressed without breaking. Significant, not catastrophic. He has felt catastrophic. He knows the difference. He gets up. Across the crater, Conquest has Nolan by the upper arm and is using him as an instrument. A controlled swing that uses Nolan's mass as a club aimed at a piece of terrain that would, if it made contact, drive Nolan into the subsurface cavity at Marker 4. It is an instinctive tactical move, the kind of environmental improvisation that 4,000 years produces automatically, and it is also the wrong choice on this specific terrain. Nolan knows Marker 4 is there. He has walked Marker 4. He knows the subsurface cavity's span and the depth of the regolith above it, and the specific point at which surface contact would compromise the ceiling. He uses the swing's momentum to rotate rather than resist, converting the arc into a full-body revolution that puts Conquest's arm in extension and his own feet toward the surface at an angle that is not Marker 4. He lands hard, loses the grip on his footing, and goes down on one knee, but down on one knee in the right place, 30 inches from the marker rather than on it. The cybernetic arm retracts. Conquest follows. He always follows. Mark comes over the crater wall at the moment Conquest is fully committed to the follow. This is the geometry they built the killbox for. The specific configuration where Conquest's forward commitment to Nolan creates a rear lateral opening that a second opponent can exploit if the second opponent knows where Conquest is going to be. And Mark knows where Conquest is going to be, because Conquest always follows, because it always worked has made following structural rather than tactical. Mark does not go for the body. He goes for the head, both hands, lateral compression targeting the inner ears, the Viltrumite flight organ, the vestibular system that the saturation field has been working on for 22 hours. Not a strike. A sustained grip, applying rotational pressure in the specific direction the Conquest's left side compensation weakness, the one the GDA files documented as a combat injury from 6 centuries ago, the one Nolan's annotations confirmed and located precisely, makes most effective. The saturation field has Conquest's vestibular calibration at 7% degradation. The grip adds the focused mechanical disruption of direct pressure on the compromised system. Conquest's flight falters. It is half a second, a single stuttered moment, where the biogravitational field that keeps a Viltrumite oriented in three-dimensional space hiccups, where the continuous unconscious calculation of altitude and attitude and thrust vector loses coherence for a duration that is, in absolute terms, nothing. In relative terms, it is geological. Nolan's counterattack arrives in that window with the precision of a man who has been waiting for this specific half-second since the fight began, who has spent every preceding exchange creating the conditions for it, who has 2,000 years of combat experience, and has just spent a week on this terrain doing nothing but calibrating for this moment. The strike goes into Conquest's left side, the organic side, not the prosthetic, with the full committed mass of a Viltrumite who is not holding anything back. The sound of it in the vacuum is nothing, because there is no medium to carry it, but the seismic transmission through the regolith registers on the GDA's lunar surface monitors as a measurable event. Conquest moves 30 meters. He does not go down. He moves 30 meters and does not go down, and that is the accurate measure of what he is. What he has always been. What 4,000 years produced. A thing that does not go down easily or quickly, or from a single strike no matter how it's delivered. But he is slower when he rights himself. The vestibular disruption from the grip is compounding with the saturation field and the accumulated impact stress of 20 minutes of combat at maximum output, and the slowing is small. And the slowing does not matter yet, and in 5 more minutes, it will matter enormously. Mark is already repositioned. Nolan is already repositioned. Conquest looks at them across 30 meters of prepared lunar surface, and something moves through his expression that has not been there at any point in this fight. It is not fear. Conquest does not have the architecture for fear in the way most species do. It is something more specific and more foreign to him. The first edges of a recognition that the model he is operating from is wrong, and that the model being wrong is not a variable he has a protocol for. He comes back in. Of course he does. Conquest does not have a protocol for withdrawal any more than he has a protocol for confusion. Forward is the only direction his combat philosophy contains, and he deploys it with the absolute commitment of a system running its last available process. The next 4 minutes are the most brutal in the fight. He finds Nolan's shoulder, the specific stress point that his own accumulated records on Nolan's operational history document as a recurring injury site, an old wound from an engagement 20 years prior that healed imperfectly and has been a structural liability since. The hit lands precisely and Nolan takes it fully. No deflection, and the sound of it through bone conduction and regolith transmission is significant. Nolan goes end over end across 30 meters of lunar surface and stays down for 4 seconds before the count completes. 4 seconds in which Mark is alone in the pocket with Conquest. 4 seconds that are the most demanding thing the chapter contains. Mark does not run, he does not attempt to close the distance at full commitment, and he does not retreat to preserve the interval. He does something that requires more of him than either option. He holds the pocket at mid-range, keeping Conquest engaged without giving him the close-quarters control that his 4,000-year fighting style optimizes for. Absorbing 2 strikes that he cannot fully deflect, because deflecting them would require breaking the positional structure that is keeping Conquest from accessing Nolan's downed position. The first strike opens a cut above his left eye from the edge of the cybernetic arm's housing. The second compresses 2 ribs on the right side that were already stressed from the first exchange. Both are real. Both are costs he accepts and notes and files and does not deviate from his objective to address. 4 seconds. Nolan gets up. The next sequence takes 11 seconds and covers 40 meters of terrain and involves 27 individual strikes divided between them according to the spatial division they have been running since the first exchange. Nolan owns the front, Mark owns the angles, and the angles are what end it. Mark has been steering the fight for 6 minutes. Every exchange, every repositioning, every strike taken and deflection chosen has been navigation rather than reaction, moving the engagement toward the subsurface cavity at marker 4 with the patience of someone who knows the destination and is simply managing the route. Conquest is at marker 4. Mark drives into him from the right lateral angle, not with maximum force, with maximum precision. A strike targeted not at Conquest's body, but at his base, his footing. The specific point of contact between his mass and the regolith above the cavity, whose ceiling is rated, per the geological survey data, for approximately 60% of the loading that Conquest's body mass plus Mark's impact force represents. The ceiling gives. Conquest drops 8 feet into the subsurface cavity, hits the floor of it hard enough to compress the lower surface, and the cavity's walls, disturbed by the impact, begin the slow-motion collapse that low-gravity geological processes produce when their load-bearing structures are compromised. He is not trapped. He could come up through the ceiling the way he went through it. But the disorientation from the collapsed ceiling and the compounded vestibular degradation and the accumulated impact stress of 24 minutes of combat against 2 opponents who did not stop, who got up every time, who never gave him the psychological confirmation that his reputation usually produces before the body even connects. He tries to rise. He gets to 1 knee. He does not get further than 1 knee. Mark and Nolan stand at the edge of the cavity and look down at him. The saturation field hums its frequency through the rock between them. Conquest looks up, breathing hard in the specific way that a body under maximum sustained output breathes when the output is finally genuinely being asked to answer for itself. The confusion on his face is the most devastating thing in the chapter. Not pain. Confusion. The naked, undefended confusion of a 4,000-year-old warrior who has just encountered the one scenario his experience has no category for, 2 opponents who were never impressed, who were never afraid, who dismantled him not with power, but with preparation and patience, and the specific kind of certainty that only belongs to men who already know how the story ends. Mark crouches at the cavity's edge. His voice is the same voice it has been for the entire engagement. Level, present, without theater. "This is the part where you tell me it's not over," he says. "That the Empire will send more. That we can't fight all of them." Conquest says nothing. The confusion is still there. He cannot locate the script for this situation, because the script has never needed to exist before. "You're right on all counts," Mark says. "But you were the first test. The question was whether we could do this efficiently enough that the next message we send carries real weight." He stands. "You've answered that. What happens next is handled with the gravity it deserves, and without ornamentation. They do it together, in the same spatial division they have maintained throughout. Nolan taking the primary angle, Mark the secondary. It is not a spectacle. It is a conclusion. Afterward, they stand in the cavity's silence. The regolith dust settles in the slow arcs of low gravity. The Earth hangs above the crater rim, blue and white and indifferent. He never understood what he was walking into, Nolan says. Mark looks at the stars, at the specific darkness between them where the Empire is waiting for a report that is not coming. No. A beat. He thought we were going to make speeches. They begin the climb out of the cavity. They have a ship to find, a communication system to access, and a message to send to every Viltrumite warrior in the galaxy. They have been busy for 3 weeks. They are not done yet. The patrol vessel sits in lunar orbit exactly where Conquest left it. A scout-class craft, minimal profile, running on automated systems that have been cycling their maintenance routines for the past 26 minutes without receiving the check-in signal they were programmed to expect. Mark and Nolan breach the hull through the docking collar rather than the main entry, because the main entry requires a command authorization that Conquest is no longer available to provide. And the docking collar's secondary seal responds to manual override with the straightforward mechanical compliance of engineering that was never designed to resist someone who can apply 3 tons of torque to a hand-sized release mechanism. The interior is Viltrumite functional, which means it contains exactly what is required for extended solo operation and nothing that is not required. A navigation console. Life support systems running on a cycle that does not account for the possibility of the pilot being permanently absent. A communications array built to Imperial specifications that Nolan could operate in his sleep and Mark could operate in someone else's sleep. Nolan moves to the navigation console and pulls the ship from its holding pattern into a specific orbital geometry, a position that Mark identifies from memory, the precise arc that puts them in direct line-of-sight relay distance of the nearest Viltrumite communications beacon. Mark knows the beacon's location because he spent 5 centuries using the Imperial communications network, and the beacon positions are as familiar to him as the layout of his childhood home. More familiar, in some ways. He spent more time with one than the other. Mark sits at the communications console. He does not immediately reach for the controls. He looks at the array for a moment, the specific look of someone making a final accounting before a decision that cannot be unmade. When we do this, he says, the Empire's internal command structure enters a state we cannot fully model in advance. We know the general shape of what happens. We do not know the specific sequence. You knew this day was coming, Nolan says from the navigation console. I planned for it. That's not the same as being certain of it. He looks at the communications array. The uncertainty is the point, actually. If we were certain, the planning wouldn't have mattered. We're doing this because we prepared for it well enough that the uncertainty is manageable. He looks at Nolan. That's the best version of certainty available to anyone. Nolan holds his gaze. Do it. Mark turns to the console. The transmission opens on the Empire's standard command frequency, the channel that Thragg uses to coordinate all active Imperial agents. The channel that every Viltrumite warrior with a functioning communication device monitors as a baseline operational requirement. It has carried conquest orders, status updates, resource allocations, and execution notices for centuries. It has never carried what it carries now, simultaneously, on a broadband frequency that the Coalition's monitoring network has been positioned to intercept for the past 2 weeks. Since Alan's confirmation that the Coalition's listening posts had been repositioned per the coordinates on the data drive, the same transmission goes out on a parallel signal. 2 audiences, 1 message. Mark speaks in Viltrumite, not the conversational register, not the operational shorthand that field agents use between themselves. The formal Imperial register, the language of throne rooms and declarations, of coronations and edicts, the specific cadence that carries authority in its architecture, because it was built by people who understood that power communicates before it acts. He has spoken it for 5 centuries. His accent and phrasing are not approximations or learned performances. They are native. Part 1. Identification. His name, stated in full with the formal Viltrumite patronymic construction that the Empire uses for bloodline documentation. His parentage, Nolan Grayson, called Omni-Man, field designation Viltrumite Agent Earth Primary, operational for 23 years. Then the bloodline designation. The name of Argal, spoken in the formal register with its full hereditary title, followed by the genetic verification codes that Mark carries in memory from his Emperor-era coronation documentation, a sequence of 47 alphanumeric markers in the Viltrumite genetic notation system that any Imperial archivist can cross-reference against the Empire's own records in under 4 minutes. He states, without inflection, that these codes can be verified, that the verification will confirm what he is about to say. That any Viltrumite warrior who chooses to verify before deciding how to respond is exercising the kind of judgment that the Empire claims to value and almost never actually rewards. Part 2. The accusation, stated with the flatness of a man reading a structural report about a building he is not emotionally attached to. Thragg has known about the Argal bloodline for decades. The specific decade of discovery is included, the year cross-referenced against the imperial calendar that every Viltrumite warrior uses to log their operational history. He has suppressed this information deliberately, through specific actions, and Mark names those actions. The reassignment of 3 imperial archivists who were present at the moment of discovery, their names, their previous postings, their subsequent reassignments to positions with limited communication access. The dates of those reassignments cross-referenced against the discovery timeline. The names of the archivists land on the frequency and travel outward at the speed of light toward every active Viltrumite communication device in range of the beacon relay. These are not invented names. Every Viltrumite warrior who has operated within the Empire's administrative structure for the past several decades will recognize at least one of them. The archivists are real. Their reassignments are documented. The pattern of those reassignments, laid against the timeline Mark is providing, will not require sophisticated analysis to read. Part 3. The formal challenge. Not a request, not a political maneuver dressed as a request. An invocation of the succession law that the Empire has maintained since before the transition to Grand Regent authority. A mechanism Thragg has never dismantled, because dismantling it would require acknowledging that the throne can be challenged, which is itself a form of acknowledgement he has spent decades avoiding. By this law, Thragg is now compelled to respond. He must either answer the bloodline claim through the formal response protocols or produce verifiable evidence that the claim is false. The second option does not exist. Mark states this plainly. The evidence cannot be produced because it was never fabricated. The bloodline is real, the records are real, the verification codes will confirm what they confirm regardless of what Thragg does in the next 72 hours. Part 4. The offer. Direct, unadorned, spoken in the operational register rather than the formal one, because this part is not for the historical record. It is for the individual warriors who are listening to this, on whatever world they are currently occupying, doing the specific arithmetic that every soldier does when the authority structure they have been operating under is called into credible question. Those who serve the Empire rather than Thragg personally, those whose loyalty is to the civilization rather than the man who currently controls it, are offered recognition. Full status, operational continuity, a place in a reformed imperial structure. The challenge is not against them. It is against one man who suppressed a legal succession and built his authority on that suppression for decades. Mark does not ask them to act. He asks them to verify, to check the codes against the archives, to look at the reassignment records, to make their own assessment of what the evidence means. He ends the transmission. His hand comes off the console. He does not move for a moment. The ship's automated systems cycle through their routines with the indifference of machinery that does not know what just happened. "It's out," Nolan says from the navigation console, his voice carrying the weight of a man who has just watched his son do the thing they came back to do. "It's out," Mark confirms. Every active agent within beacon relay range will have it within 48 hours, and Thragg within the hour. Mark looks at the communications array, at the console that is now silent, the transmission complete, the message irrecoverable. Whatever he does next, he's doing it while managing a political crisis that has no containment option. You cannot unbroadcast a genetic verification code sequence. You cannot reassign the archivists again. They've already been reassigned once. Doing it again confirms the pattern. You cannot deny the challenge without publishing that denial on the same frequency, which means every warrior who missed the original transmission gets it through the denial. He stands. He's in a maze that has no exit. The only question is, which walls he runs into first. A Viltrumite garrison on a world in the outer systems. The warrior receiving the transmission is 600 years old and has served under 3 different Grand Regents, which means she has seen authority structures change before and knows what the early signs look like. She listens to the transmission twice. She pulls up the Imperial Genetic Archive on her command terminal, a process that takes 4 minutes and returns a verification result that she looks at for a very long time without moving. Then she looks at the warrior across the room. He is looking at her. Neither of them speaks. She reaches for a communication device. He does not stop her. He watches. A Viltrumite commander running a deep cover integration operation on a coalition border world. He receives the transmission through his monitoring equipment and spends 40 minutes cross-referencing the archivist's names against the administrative records he has access to through his operational clearance level. The reassignment dates are there. The pattern is exactly what the transmission described. He sits back in his chair and looks at the ceiling of a building on a world he has been preparing for conquest for 11 years, and does a very specific kind of arithmetic that has nothing to do with invasion timelines. Thragg. The transmission reaches him through his personal command channel, and he listens to it in its entirety without moving. This is established through what is visible rather than what is described. His hands. The Grand Regent's hands, which have ended more lives than most civilizations have produced, which have held the Empire together through a population crisis that should have ended it, which have never, in 4,000 years of documented imperial history, been seen to be anything other than controlled. The hands are completely still, which is more alarming for anyone who knows what controlled looks like on a man like Thragg than any other reaction would be. Alan the alien, aboard a coalition monitoring vessel at the outer edge of the relay network, receives the transmission through the listening post repositioning that Mark's data drive made possible. He listens. He looks at the drive, sitting on the console beside him, where it has been since he returned from Earth. It worked, Alan says. His superior officer looks at the verification codes, scrolling across the display, and says nothing for a full 10 seconds. "Get me a line to High Command," he says. Then, "Secure channel, now." Cecil receives the broadcast transcript through the GDA's Deep Space Array 12 minutes after transmission. He reads it once. He sets it down on his desk. He picks up the phone, the direct line to Mark, not the command channel, the actual phone number, and dials. Mark picks up on the second ring. "The political fallout timeline," Cecil says. "How long before the fracturing becomes visible in their operational behavior?" 2 weeks for the first defections to surface, Mark replies. 4 weeks before Thragg's consolidation efforts become detectable through the communication pattern changes. 6 weeks before he commits to a response posture. And the response posture. He comes here, he has to. The challenge was issued from this system, and he cannot answer it from deep space without conceding that the claim is legitimate enough to travel for. A pause. Which it is. Cecil is quiet for a moment. "You're using his empire's laws against him." "His empire's laws," Mark says. He's just the man who forgot they still apply to him. Cecil sets the transcript down flat on his desk. He smooths one edge of it with his thumb, the same small gesture he made with the reanimant schematic in the clean room 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks, he says, give or take. "I'll tell the Guardians to prepare for an extended operational tempo," Cecil says. "Tell them to rest," Mark says, "while they still can." The line closes. Cecil looks at the transcript. Outside the GDA command center, above the building, above the city, above the atmosphere, the broadcast is still traveling, outward in every direction at the speed of light, carrying the verification codes and the archivist's names and the bloodline challenge into a galaxy that has been afraid of the Viltrumite Empire for centuries. It will reach the farthest active beacon relay in 31 days. By then, the Empire will already be different. 6 weeks is enough time for an empire to show its cracks, if you know where to look. Cecil knows where to look because Mark told him, and Mark told him with the precision of someone reading from memory rather than predicting from inference. The specific communication pattern changes that indicate Thragg's consolidation efforts, the particular silence from certain operational sectors that means a warrior has stopped reporting rather than gone dark for operational reasons. The difference between the two being something that only makes sense if you already know which warriors are questioning and which are committed and why. The GDA's Deep Space Array has been running continuous monitoring since the broadcast. The transcript of every intercepted Viltrumite communication, fragmentary, partially encrypted, filtered through translation protocols that Nolan has been refining for 6 weeks using his native fluency, sits on Mark's desk in daily summary form. He reads each one the way he reads everything, completely, once, with specific attention to what is absent as much as what is present. 3 high-ranking warriors have gone silent in ways that the consolidation pattern does not account for. Not defected, not yet. Gone quiet in the specific way of people who are waiting to see which direction the weight falls before committing their own. Mark has been in contact with them through intermediaries, coalition relay channels that Alan's repositioned listening posts facilitate without leaving a traceable origin signature. The conversations are brief. He does not ask for loyalty, he offers terms: recognition, status, operational continuity under a reformed structure. He explains the verification codes and tells them where to find the archive access to confirm them. He gives them the information and lets them do the arithmetic themselves, because soldiers who arrive at a conclusion through their own analysis hold it more reliably than soldiers who were told what to conclude. 4 of the 6 he contacted have accepted terms. The other 2 have gone silent in a different way, the way that means Thragg found them first. Mark notes this without revision to the strategic picture. He planned for attrition in the defector recruitment phase. The 4 who accepted are positioned where they need to be. The coalition fleet has been moving for 3 weeks. Allen's briefings to the High Command produced the response Mark anticipated, not immediate and not without extensive internal debate, but ultimately the response of an organization that has spent decades looking for exactly this kind of intelligence advantage, and has just received it in comprehensive form. The fleet is the largest coordinated coalition military operation since the First Viltrumite War, assembled from the member worlds' combined combat assets and positioned at the coordinates Mark specified, with a timing window of plus or minus 72 hours. Thragg's consolidation is visible now through the communication pattern analysis. He has pulled his remaining committed warriors, 31 of them, per the intercept data, into a defensive cluster around the Viltrumite home system. Not a retreat, a fortress posture. The distinction matters. Retreat implies yielding ground, and Thragg does not yield ground. The fortress posture is the response of a man who has decided that his ground is here, this system, this specific territory, and that anyone who wants to challenge him must come to where he is standing. Mark reads the final positioning summary on the morning of the operation, and sets it down with the flat, completed attention of someone checking the last item on a list. "He's where we need him," he says to Nolan. "He's where he wants to be," Nolan replies. "Both things." Mark stands. "Let's go tell the coalition." The Grayson home, the night before the kitchen is the same kitchen it has always been. The light above the sink. The specific smell of a house that has been inhabited by the same people for long enough that the house has absorbed them. Debbie is at the table when Mark comes in, which means she has been waiting. She does not sit at the kitchen table at 11 at night for any other reason. He sits across from her. He has been rehearsing this conversation for 6 weeks and has concluded that there is no version of it that is not exactly what it is. So he gives her the exact version. He tells her everything. Not the tactical details. Those belong to the operation, and she does not need them. He tells her what he is. What happened to him and Nolan. The timeline they came from, the war they are trying to prevent, the empire they are flying toward in the morning. He tells her about the version of her that he knew, the woman who held a marriage together with a secret inside it for 23 years, and rebuilt herself after the secret detonated. He tells her this not because she needs to know it tactically, but because he will not fly toward Thragg without his mother knowing who is flying. She listens without interrupting. This is consistent with who she is. Debbie Grayson has always processed large things quietly, in real time, without the performance of reaction. When he finishes, the kitchen is quiet. The light above the sink hums its single note. "You're coming back," she says. "Yes, because you remember coming back. Because I'm not going without Dad, and together, we're not losing this fight." He looks at her, his mother sitting across a kitchen table, holding the full weight of what he just told her with the specific composure of someone who has been quietly extraordinary for so long that extraordinary has become her baseline. "I'm not going to tell you nothing happens. I'm telling you that we prepared for everything we could prepare for, and we are ready. Your father used to say things like that," she says. "I know. He said them to me, a beat, carrying everything the beat contains. They were true, too." She reaches across the table and puts her hand over his. She does not speak again. After a moment, he covers her hand with his other one, and they sit in the kitchen while the clock above the stove marks the minutes of the last quiet night before the operation. Nolan is in the doorway. Neither of them heard him arrive. He looks at his wife and his son at the kitchen table in the light above the sink, and his expression does the thing it does in the places that mean the most. It stops being managed. Debbie looks up. She looks at him for a long moment, with the full complexity of 23 years, and a secret and a choice he made before this timeline, and a choice he is making now. Then she extends her free hand. He crosses the kitchen. He takes it. Deep space. The rendezvous point, the scale of it is the first thing. Mark has commanded Viltrumite fleets. He has seen the Empire's military assets assembled for major operations and has calibrated his sense of what military scale looks like against those experiences. The Coalition fleet at the rendezvous point is not larger than what he has seen before in absolute terms, but it is assembled from dozens of distinct member worlds, each contributing whatever their technology and population can produce. And the resulting collection, the variety of it, the range of hull designs and propulsion signatures and weapons configurations, the fact that all of these species who have spent centuries being afraid of the same empire have come to the same point in space at the same time, carries a weight that pure numbers do not. Alan stands at the command position aboard the flagship. He looks at Mark and Nolan when they arrive, and the look contains everything that has happened in the 6 weeks since the orbital conversation above Earth, the Coalition debates, the verification of the archive codes, the fleet mobilization, the cost of all of it, compressed into the specific expression of a man who bet on something and is watching the bet confirmed. Thragg's loyalists are consolidated around the home system, Alan says. 31 committed warriors confirmed through intercept data. Your 4 contacts have confirmed positioning. His outer cordon, Mark says, studying the tactical display. 3 warriors at the outer boundary, here and here. The main body pulled inward toward the homeworld. He's expecting a direct assault on the home system. He wants us to commit to the approach before we have confirmation of what we're approaching. He wants to see the full fleet before he engages, Alan says. He wants to see me, Mark replies. The fleet is context. I'm the target. He looks at the display, the positioning data, the approach vectors, the timing window. The fleet engages the outer cordon simultaneously across all 3 boundary positions. Full commitment, immediate, no staged approach. He needs to process 31 warriors being engaged on multiple fronts at the same time that his primary target is on approach. When he comes out to intercept, and he will come out. He can't let us reach the homeworld, Nolan says. It's not in him. That's when we take the intercept. Before he reaches the fleet, open space, no terrain advantage for either side. Mark looks at Nolan, which means our advantage is preparation and each other. He'll try to isolate you, Nolan says. Take me out first, then deal with you one-on-one. I know, which is why you don't let him. Nolan holds his gaze. Something passes between them that does not require language. The specific communication of 2 people who have already been through the worst version of something together and are choosing to go through the better version now, with their eyes open. Fleet is ready on your mark, Alan says. Mark looks at the display one final time, at the positions, at the timing, at the 6 weeks of preparation that have led to this specific configuration in this specific place. Mark, he says. Near Viltrumite home space, the Coalition fleet engages the outer cordon in 3 simultaneous strikes, and the battle that follows is brutal in the way that battles are brutal when both sides have something real at stake, and the capability to act on it. The 3 Viltrumite warriors at the outer boundary are not symbolic defenders. They are veterans of the specific kind that 4,000 years of imperial expansion produces, people who have survived everything the galaxy has previously sent against them, and have calibrated their threat assessment accordingly. The intelligence from Mark's data drive gives the Coalition strike teams specific combat pattern data on each of them, which translates in practical terms to approach vectors that avoid their strongest responses and press their documented weaknesses. It does not make the engagement clean. Nothing at this scale is clean. Ships are destroyed. Coalition ships, each one carrying personnel who came from a member world that sent them because the Coalition asked, and the cause was worth the cost. Mark tracks the loss rate through the tactical feed on his approach vector, and it is within the projected range he gave the Coalition high command, and it is still, in absolute terms, a cost that has faces on it that he cannot afford to think about right now, and will have to think about later. The outer cordon breaks after 20 minutes, not collapsed, broken, which means the 3 warriors are no longer a unified defensive line and are instead being contained by Coalition units that are taking sustained casualties to maintain the containment. It is not a clean victory. It is a managed situation that is costing more than the projections suggested, and less than the unprepared alternative would have. Thragg emerges at minute 23. He comes through the inner defensive layer the way a geological event comes through the surface. Not dramatically, just with a force that the environment is not designed to resist. He moves through the fleet's approach elements, and the Coalition ships in his path execute emergency avoidance protocols that their crews have been drilled on for 3 weeks, and which are, in the face of the actual thing, barely sufficient. He is not fighting the fleet. He is moving through it. There is a difference. He is looking for Mark. There, Mark says. The tactical feed shows Thragg's trajectory, direct, purposeful, oriented toward the approach vector that Mark and Nolan are on. Ready, Nolan says. Mark looks at his father. At the man who flew with him above a kitchen table neighborhood, once in a different timeline, and showed him what flight felt like when it was just flight and nothing else. At the soldier who went to his knees in the Guardian's base, rather than raise his hand against the people he was sent to kill. Let's go, Mark says. They close the distance toward Thragg at full speed, and the stars around them are the same stars that have been there for the entirety of the story, indifferent and permanent, unchanged by anything that happens in the space between them. He is the most dangerous Viltrumite alive. This must be understood before anything else, not because the story requires a worthy antagonist, because it is true, and the truth of it is the entire reason 6 weeks of preparation were necessary, and the entire reason Mark is about to discover that preparation and certainty are related concepts but not identical ones. Thragg does not posture. He does not speak. He has read the broadcast, processed its implications, made his decisions, and arrived at this moment with the specific clarity of a man who has simplified a complex situation into a single action. Remove the source of the disruption, and the disruption ends. He attacks Mark first. Not Nolan, Mark, because the broadcast identified Mark as the political threat, and Thragg's combat doctrine has always subordinated tactical sequence to strategic priority. The political threat is the primary target. Everything else is secondary. The attack is the fastest thing Mark has encountered in this timeline. Not fast in the way that Conquest was fast. Conquest's speed was the product of 4,000 years of physical refinement. Thragg's speed is something different, something that belongs to a category above refinement. The speed of a body that has been at the absolute apex of its species' physical capability for longer than most civilizations have existed, and has spent that time doing nothing but becoming more precisely itself. Mark gets his guard up. Partially. The impact drives him back 200 meters in open space, and the guard that he managed to interpose between his body and the strike absorbs enough of the force that his internal assessment registers damage rather than catastrophic damage. 200 meters in the time it takes to exhale. He orients. Nolan intercepts on the secondary line, closing on Thragg's rear lateral position while Mark was moving backward, because they planned this specific response. Nolan covering the interval while Mark recovers the position. Thragg handles Nolan's assault with something that is more alarming than dismissal. He handles it with attention, the specific attention of a warrior who is genuinely evaluating the threat in front of him rather than processing it as a minor variable. He redirects Nolan's primary strike, absorbs the follow combination on his leading shoulder without perceptible effect, and returns 3 strikes in the time that a lesser opponent would have taken to process the first. Nolan takes 2 of them fully and deflects the third into a glancing contact that is still significant. He does not go down, he repositions. For 40 seconds, they hold. Both of them, in the spatial division they have been running since the lunar surface, Nolan occupying Thragg's primary combat orientation, Mark working the secondary angles. And the 40 seconds cost both of them in ways that the Conquest engagement did not. Because Thragg is adjusting in real time, he is reading the coordination pattern, he is identifying the spatial logic. He is, within 40 seconds of engagement, beginning to develop a counter. This is what makes him what he is. He finds Nolan's shoulder at second 41, the same stress point that 4,000 years of operational records document, the same point Conquest targeted, but where Conquest hit it with raw force. Thragg hits it with the precision of someone who has had 41 seconds to analyze the structural data and identify the exact angle of application that maximizes damage relative to force expended. Nolan goes into the hull of a coalition cruiser at a velocity that embeds him in the outer layer of the hull plating. The extraction takes 15 seconds, 15 seconds in which Nolan is working to free himself from the hull of a ship, and Mark is alone in open space with Thragg. Thragg looks at Mark. Then he closes the distance. The 15 seconds are the most demanding thing the story has contained. Mark does not run. He does not commit to a full offensive that would give Thragg the close-quarters engagement that Thragg's fighting style is optimized for. He holds the mid-range interval with the specific discipline of someone who has made a decision about what those 15 seconds require, and is executing it regardless of the cost. The cost is real, a strike to the right side of his chest that compresses 3 ribs past the point of comfort and well into the point of structural concern. A second to his left arm that he deflects enough to redirect from the joint to the upper muscle mass, which is a better outcome than the alternative and still a significant one. He takes both and stays in the pocket and keeps Thragg engaged and moving, burning Thragg's output against a target that will not break and will not retreat. 12 seconds. 13. 14. Nolan comes off the hull. They do not accelerate the fight. They slow it. This is the thing that Thragg cannot process. The thing that his combat model has no category for. The same category failure that finished Conquest on the lunar surface, but operating at a level that Conquest's engagement did not reach. Mark and Nolan, after Nolan's return, stop trying to match Thragg's intensity and begin instead to extend the engagement deliberately. They take hits they could avoid. They choose contact over distance. They spend themselves against him in the specific way of two people who have decided that the fight's duration is a weapon and they are deploying it. Thragg is the greatest warrior alive. He has sustained maximum output against 2 coordinated opponents for longer than any previous engagement in his documented history has required. His body is the product of 5,000 years of physical development, and it is answering the demand he is placing on it, and it will continue to answer that demand because Viltrumite physiology at his level does not have a simple exhaustion threshold, but sustained maximum output against opponents who will not break has a cumulative cost, not exhaustion. Something more precise, the specific compound effect of fighting 2 simultaneous combat zones, of constant adjustment and recalibration, of the cognitive load of tracking 2 opponents who are coordinating below the level of verbal communication and making his model of the next 5 seconds obsolete every 4 seconds. He adjusts faster than any opponent Mark has ever fought. He recalibrates faster than the Conquest engagement prepared them for, and the preparation they did for Thragg specifically, 500 years of personal observation. Every combat tendency documented, every physiological limit mapped, is the only reason the adjustments do not end the fight before it reaches the moment they have been building toward. At the 6-minute mark, Thragg's spatial tracking of Mark's secondary angle is delayed by a fraction that is not visible to any observer, and is completely apparent to Mark, who has been waiting for it. Not because Thragg is tired, because he has been running a 2-front calculation for 6 minutes against opponents who were designed for this specific fight. And the delay is the first evidence that the calculation's complexity has reached the edge of what even his capability can sustain without cost. Mark closes, not from the secondary angle, from the primary one, abandoning the spatial division they have maintained for the entire engagement, crossing into Nolan's zone because Nolan has already read the decision and vacated it, crossing to the position that Thragg's primary combat orientation has been anchored to for 6 minutes, and that is now, for the first time in the fight, undefended on the angle that matters. He applies everything, not the controlled 80% that the engagement has required until this moment. Everything. 500 years directed at a single point in the specific sustained commitment of someone who has been holding this in reserve and is now releasing it completely. Nolan takes the primary orientation simultaneously, not suppression, commitment, the full weight of 2,000 years of combat experience applied with the finality of a man who knows this is the last time this specific fight needs to happen. Thragg cannot process 2 full commitments from 2 directions simultaneously. The calculation that has been running for 6 minutes reaches a load it cannot carry, and in that moment, that single moment of overload, Mark and Nolan are already inside it. What follows takes 4 seconds and does not require description beyond its result. Thragg speaks once, at the end, to Mark. Through the specific ruin of a certainty that has lasted 5,000 years, through the collapse of the only identity he has ever known, through the evidence, final and complete, that the thing he has been afraid of since he first read the Argall bloodline documentation in an Imperial archive decades ago, has arrived and is exactly as definitive as he feared. "You should have," he starts. "I know," Mark says quietly. He is breathing hard. The ribs on his right side are reporting something that will take days to fully assess. His left arm is telling him things he will attend to later. "You're not the first person to tell me that." The stars do not change. The Coalition fleet continues its operations in the middle distance. The Viltrumite home system sits in the same position it has occupied for as long as the Empire has existed. Everything is different anyway. The debris field is quiet in the way that space is always quiet. Completely without gradation, The absolute absence of medium that makes silence here not a condition but a fact of physics. Mark and Nolan float in it. Around them, the coalition fleet continues its operational tempo. Containment formations, communication bursts, the organized movement of hundreds of vessels executing the mop-up protocols that Alan's command staff have been running since Thragg's loyalists received confirmation of what happened in open space 12 minutes ago. 3 of the remaining loyal warriors surrendered immediately upon receiving that confirmation. 4 more required containment operations that cost the coalition additional casualties. The rest, the ones who had already been questioning, the ones who verified the archive codes, the ones who went quiet in the specific way of people waiting to see which direction the weight fell, were already in holding positions that Mark's defector contacts had coordinated over the preceding weeks. The battle is not over. The aftermath of a battle of this scale is never over quickly, but the outcome is no longer in question, which is a different thing, and Mark and Nolan occupy the quiet of that difference in the debris field while the fleet works around them. They are both injured. Not catastrophically, they have both been catastrophically injured before, and know the difference with the precision of people who have had to make tactical decisions based on that difference while still in the fight. Mark's right ribs are 3 of them fractured, the assessment arriving now that the adrenaline of sustained combat is receding and his body is presenting its accounting. His left arm is functional but communicating a deep muscle compromise that will take 4 days to resolve. The cut above his left eye from Conquest's prosthetic housing, which he has been carrying since the lunar surface, has long since clotted in the vacuum. Nolan's shoulder, the one that Thragg hit with 5,000 years of specific anatomical knowledge behind it, is the most significant injury between them. He is holding it with the careful, minimal movement of someone who has assessed the damage and made the decision not to move it more than necessary until it can be properly addressed. His face communicates pain in the specific way of someone who has extensive experience with pain and is neither dramatizing it nor pretending it isn't there. Mark looks at him. Nolan looks at Mark. The accounting passes between them in the non-verbal register they have been operating in since the Guardian's base. The sum of everything, the cost of everything, the fact that they are both here and the fight is done, and the thing they came back to do is done. It's done, Nolan says. The hard part is done. Mark looks at the stars, at the specific darkness between them that is no longer organized around a threat. Now comes the complicated part. Nolan actually laughs. It is quiet and exhausted and completely genuine. The laugh of a man who spent 2,000 years without the luxury of finding anything genuinely funny, and has been slowly, over the past 6 weeks, rediscovering that the capacity was still there. 500 years as Emperor, and you still call politics the complicated part. Because it is. Mark looks at his father, at the man on the other side of the thing they just did together. You ready for this? Nolan considers it with the honesty of someone who has stopped performing certainty for the benefit of observers. No. A beat that carries its full weight. Yes. Viltrumite home space. Hours later. The remaining Viltrumite warriors assemble in the space above the homeworld, with the specific gravity of people who have just watched the foundation of their entire operational reality change irrevocably and are still in the process of locating their footing. There are 19 of them, the survivors of Thragg's loyalist force, who chose surrender over continued resistance, plus the 4 defectors who aligned with Mark weeks ago and who stand now in a different spatial position from the others, separated by the visible fact of their prior choice. Alan's containment operation has them positioned in a loose formation that is organized enough to communicate coalition control without being aggressive enough to communicate that aggression would be welcome. Mark addresses them in the formal imperial register. He does not posture. He does not perform the authority that the Argal bloodline documentation gives him. He simply speaks from it, which is a distinction that every Viltrumite warrior in the formation will feel in the specific way that they have been trained, through the entire length of their lives, to recognize. He acknowledges their service, not as a courtesy, as an accurate statement. These are warriors who served the empire they believed in with the full commitment of everything they were. And the fact that the empire's leadership was built on a suppressed succession does not retroactively erase the genuine conviction behind their service. He does not ask them to feel shame for following the authority structure they were given. He asks them to make a new choice, now that a different authority structure is available. He states the terms with the same directness he has used for every consequential statement since the Guardian's base. Those who pledge to the reconstituted imperial structure, to an empire governed by the legitimate bloodline, organized around consolidation rather than expansion, oriented toward a galactic community rather than the domination of one, will receive full recognition of status and a defined role in the work ahead. Those who cannot make that pledge are free to withdraw to neutral space. There is no coercion, there is no third option, but there is no coercion. The silence after he finishes lasts 11 seconds. Craig moves first. He is the oldest of the surviving loyalists, a 600-year veteran whose service record predates Thragg's Grand Regent tenure, who has spent the past 6 weeks verifying the archive codes with the methodical patience of someone who does not accept conclusions without doing the mathematics himself. He has done the mathematics. He arrived at the same result every time. He does not cross the space between his position and Mark's with any theater. He simply moves, the direct economical movement of a Viltrumite warrior doing a thing he has decided to do, and takes a position to Mark's left, facing the remaining assembled warriors. One by one, over the course of 4 minutes, they follow. Not all of them immediately. 2 hold their position for the full 4 minutes before moving, which Mark notes without impatience. 4 minutes is a reasonable amount of time to spend on a decision of this magnitude. When the last one moves, the formation has reorganized itself around a new center, and the reorganization is visible and complete, and witnessed by the coalition fleet positioned above them. Alan, watching from the flagship's observation position, says nothing for a long moment. Then he turns to his second-in-command. "Log it," Alan says. "The Viltrumite Empire surrenders to reconstituted imperial authority under the Argal bloodline. Time and coordinates for the record." His second-in-command begins logging. Alan keeps looking at the formation below, at Mark in the center of it, at Nolan to his right, at the assembled warriors who have just chosen something different from everything their civilization has done for centuries. He allows himself the moment. Then he turns back to the operational display and continues the work. Coalition flagship. After the surrender. Alan approaches Mark in the corridor outside the command room. He has been waiting for a moment without operational urgency, which on a flagship in the immediate aftermath of a major engagement is a relative concept, but he finds one. He looks at Mark with the expression of a man who prepared something to say and has now decided it needs to be said differently than he prepared it. "I owe you something," Alan says. Mark waits. "When you first contacted me above Earth, I thought the probability that this was legitimate was low, that the more likely explanation was a sophisticated Empire operation, a long approach designed to infiltrate coalition intelligence." He meets Mark's eyes. "I took the drive because the potential upside justified the risk of being wrong. I did not take it because I believed you." "That was the correct assessment given the available information," Mark says. "It was wrong," Alan replies. "And I know that's not the same thing." He extends his fist, the coalition gesture, the same one from the orbital conversation above Earth, but carrying something different now. Not the tentative acknowledgement of 2 people agreeing to work toward a common point. The acknowledgement of 2 people who have arrived at it. "The coalition considers the Viltrumite Empire, under your authority, a candidate for full membership, if you want it." Mark looks at him. Then he looks at Nolan, who has come to stand in the corridor behind Alan, who has been listening with the quiet attention of someone who knows what this moment is. Something passes between Mark and Nolan. 2 people who took different paths to the same understanding, arriving simultaneously at the knowledge that the understanding is now complete, that the thing they came back to build is built, and it is real, and it is standing. "We'll need to negotiate terms," Mark says, taking Alan's fist. "We have considerable thoughts on how Viltrumite physical capabilities can contribute to coalition defensive operations, rather than threatening member worlds." "Of course you do," Alan replies. "You'll agree with most of them." "Of course I will." Alan holds the grip for a moment. "For the record, and I want this in the official coalition transcript, the 2 of you are the strangest, most exhausting, most effective operators I have encountered in 30 years of coalition service." "Put it in the transcript," Mark says. Already did. The Grayson home. Days later, the house is the same house. This is the first thing Mark registers when he comes through the back door. The specific, irreducible sameness of a place that has absorbed the people who live in it so completely that it carries them even in their absence. The light above the sink, the smell of it, the way the back door settles in its frame when it closes. Debbie is in the kitchen. She looks up when he comes in and takes the full measure of him in the specific way she has been doing since he was small. The mother's inventory, accounting for what is present and what is absent, and what has changed. She sees the healing injuries. She sees the exhaustion that goes below the physical. She sees what is underneath both of those things, which is something she has been waiting to see since the night he sat across this table and told her everything. He is home, not in the logistical sense, in the complete sense, the sense that means the thing that was unresolved has been resolved and the person in front of her is the person who resolved it and came back. It's over, she asks. It's over. She crosses the kitchen to him and holds him the way she held him 6 weeks ago, completely, without reservation, without the careful management of someone who is trying not to communicate fear. This time, there is no fear to manage. She holds her son in her kitchen, and the kitchen is ordinary, and the ordinariness of it is, right now, the most valuable thing in the galaxy. He lets himself be held, not the abbreviated contact of someone managing an emotional moment between operational priorities. He stands in his mother's kitchen and lets her hold him for as long as she holds him, which is a long time, and he does not move until she does. Nolan appears in the doorway. He is carrying 2 cups of coffee. He made them in the front room while giving them the kitchen, which is the specific consideration of a man who has been learning for 6 weeks how to be present in a family home rather than adjacent to one. Debbie pulls back from Mark and looks at her husband. The look is long and carries everything it carries. 23 years in a secret and a choice, and a different choice in the 6 weeks just past, and all the ordinary days that preceded all of it. The full account. She takes the coffee he's offering. He puts his free arm around her. She lets him. Mark stands in his mother's kitchen with his parents and drinks his coffee and says nothing because nothing needs to be said, and the silence is not an absence but a presence. The presence of a family that has arrived through an extraordinary route, at an ordinary moment, which is the only kind of moment that actually matters. Various locations. Cecil reviews the morning reports at his desk in the GDA command center. The stack is thinner than it has been at any point in his career, not because less is happening, but because the operational infrastructure that Mark and Nolan built over the past 6 weeks has addressed the threat vectors that used to generate the volume. He reads to the bottom of the stack. He sets the last report face down. He looks at his desk, which is clear in a way it has not been since the day he took this job. He picks up his coffee. It is, for the first time anyone in this building can remember, still warm. He drinks it and says nothing and allows himself the specific private satisfaction of a man who made a bet on a 17-year-old in a folding chair and won. The Immortal sits at the head of the Guardian's briefing table, reviewing the revised operational protocols that the new geopolitical reality requires. There is a new standing agenda item, the only new item added to the Guardian's charter in 11 years. He reads it. He looks at it for a moment with the expression of a man who has survived long enough to have stopped expecting to be surprised, and is being surprised anyway. He picks up his pen. In his handwriting, the deliberate, upright script of someone who learned to write in a century when handwriting was a formal skill, he countersigns the protocol amendment. Viltrumite coordination. Standing agenda, effective immediately. He sets down the pen, looks at the team around the table, who are watching him with the cautious optimism of people who have been through enough to know that optimism requires verification before it can be trusted. New business, he says, and moves to the next item because the Immortal has never in his long life confused an ending with a stopping point, and he is not about to start. Alan, aboard a Coalition vessel in transit between the Viltrumite home system and the Coalition's primary administrative station, dictates his official report to the Council. He has been composing it for 2 days. Not because the content is complex, but because he has been searching for language adequate to what actually happened, and the search has been harder than the 6 weeks that preceded it. He settles, finally, on accuracy rather than adequacy. The threat posed by the Viltrumite Empire in its previous configuration has been permanently resolved. The reconstituted empire, operating under the authority of Emperor Mark Grayson, is confirmed as a candidate for full coalition membership pending negotiation of terms. This office recommends immediate commencement of membership discussions and full normalization of diplomatic relations. The intelligence provided by Emperor Grayson and his father at the outset of this operation proved accurate in every particular. This office further recommends that the Coalition's threat assessment protocols be updated to reflect the possibility, however rare, that a Viltrumite warrior's objectives may align with Coalition interests. The events of the past 6 weeks confirm that this possibility, when it exists, should be taken seriously. He pauses the dictation, looks out the porthole at the stars, the same stars, unchanged, indifferent. permanent. He allows himself the moment. End report, he says. On the Viltrumite homeworld, Craig sits on a piece of fallen architecture in the late afternoon of a world that has never had a late afternoon without the specific backdrop of an empire in permanent expansion. He is watching two small creatures, the Viltrumite equivalent of birds, compact and fast, and entirely unconcerned with the geopolitical transformation of the civilization they inhabit, dispute ownership of something in the dust below him. He watches them until the dispute resolves, which takes longer than either of them seems to think it should. Then he lies back on the architecture and looks at the sky. It is the same sky it has always been above this world. The same stars, the same emptiness, the same depth. It has always been the backdrop for departure, for the assembly of fleets and the calculation of approach vectors, and the specific mathematics of conquest. He looks at it now with no fleet to assemble and no vector to calculate. And the sky is the same sky, and he has no idea yet what it looks like when it is simply the sky. He decides to find out. The Viltrumite homeworld. 1 week later, Mark asked for minimal ceremony, which among a species that has always treated martial display as a primary cultural language, required specific negotiation. What they arrive at is not elaborate. An assembly of the remaining Viltrumite warriors, 19 of them plus the 4 who came early, a coalition diplomatic delegation that Alan leads personally, and Nolan standing one step to Mark's right. The formal words are brief, because Mark wrote them to be brief. The acknowledgement of the Argal bloodline, the acceptance of the responsibility that bloodline carries, and the declaration of the new imperial mandate, not in the language of conquest, which is the only language the Empire has used for centuries, but in the language of what comes after conquest, when the people who did the conquering are finally ready to ask what it was for. He speaks to the assembled warriors, and the watching coalition delegation and the open frequency that is broadcasting this across the Viltrumite communication network to every warrior still in the field, still processing the past 6 weeks, still deciding what to do with the decision that has already been made. What we were, what we did, that history doesn't disappear. It belongs to us and we carry it. We are accountable for it individually and collectively, and that accountability does not have an expiration date. He pauses. What we become, that is the work ahead. I am not here to erase what the Empire was. I am here to ensure it never has to be that again. He looks at Nolan. My father taught me something, in a way that cost both of us more than I'll describe here. He holds his father's gaze across the assembled warriors, and the diplomatic delegation, and the open frequency, and everything they have both been through in 2 different timelines too. Arrive at this moment. He taught me that the most powerful thing is not what you destroy, it is what you choose to keep. Nolan stands in the assembly of warriors, with his shoulders set and his expression completely open, not managed, not performed, not the controlled surface of a man who spent 2,000 years presenting himself as the thing the Empire needed him to be. He is simply a father at his son's coronation, at the end of a war they chose together, carrying everything it cost and everything it was worth, and the knowledge that both of those things are true simultaneously and always will be. He does not speak. He has already said everything that mattered, in a kitchen, on the moon, in a GDA corridor, in the space above a planet he was sent to conquer and chose instead to protect. The coronation ends, the frequency closes. The delegation files out with the purposeful movement of people who have work to do. The actual work of membership negotiations and diplomatic normalization, and the long, complicated, necessary process of a civilization learning to be something other than what it has always been. The morning after the coronation, they fly because they can. Because this is what Viltrumites are in the moments when they are not anything else. In the air, at speed, with the planet below them and the sky above them, and the specific freedom of a body moving at its full capability, with nowhere it has to be, and nothing it has to fight. Mark and Nolan, above a world that is learning the shape of its own sky, flying in the loose formation they have settled into over 6 weeks of coordinated operation, close enough to communicate, far enough for each of them to simply be present in their own experience of the air. The homeworld's sun is early in its arc. The light comes in flat and long, the kind of light that makes everything look like the beginning of something. Below them, the planet's surface moves past at the speed of 2 Viltrumites who are not trying to get anywhere. The geological features, the architecture of a civilization in the process of reconsidering itself, the 2 small creatures from the day before still conducting their dispute in the dust of fallen architecture. They fly, not toward anything, not away from anything, not in service of an objective or a timeline or a threat assessment that requires a response. They fly because it is the thing they both are when they are stripped of every other thing, and the stripping is complete now, and what is left is this: a father and a son in the air above a world that is finally, genuinely, and permanently safe. Mark looks over at his father. Nolan is looking at the horizon with the expression of a man encountering something he did not know he had been waiting for. Neither of them speaks. The air handles it. They fly. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.